Evening and welcome, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Ann LeBlanc. Welcome to the March 5, 2018 public hearing of the Finance.
All right.
If I could please ask everyone to start by standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Westwood Media Center is here, and they are recording the meeting. Would anyone else like to record the meeting? No affirmative responses. I will also note that Westwood Media Center is live streaming the meeting on their TV channel and on YouTube, which is pretty exciting. So thank you very much to Westwood Media Center for that. So with that, we've got a long agenda tonight to hopefully get through all of the articles on the warrant. If we do not tonight, we will continue until tomorrow night. We'll decide that later on this evening. And the first article that we have tonight is a petitioner article from Nada Milisav. I'm so sorry, Fabrizio. And welcome. Would you please identify yourself better than I just did and where you live?
Thank you, Mary Ann.
Sure.
My name is Nada Milisavljevic Fabrizio, and I live at 32 Webster Street.
Why don't you tell us about your article and what it is intended to do?
My article is intended. Really squeaking? If you can't hear me, please let me know. This article that I've presented is intended to add a definitive cap on the number of residential dwelling units, which may be constructed by special permit within the FMUO D6, Washington Street. Thank you. I'd sit here all night. And the FMUO D7, High Street, flexible multiple use overlay districts. Let's see. As I'm sure you're all aware, the language in my article is identical to that put forth collectively by our Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board in the 2017 Fall Town Meeting warrant that failed to pass despite a favorable recommendation by the Finance and Warrant Commission. I've only changed the number of allowed residential dwelling units to reflect a reduction from the then proposed 90 residential dwelling units to a more reasonable number of 30 residential dwelling units. This article provides a clearly understandable limit on residential units. Should it pass with a 2/3 majority vote at our upcoming town meeting, it will not effectuate any changes whatsoever to the affordability requirements set forth in section 9.5.14 of our zoning bylaws. And it's being put forth because residents would like to preserve our small town character. And that's it.
Thank you for that. Questions from FinCom? Yeah.
How does that affect the existing units that are in those current districts, like Coburn School and over in Islington?
Well, I contacted Sarah Bouchard, who's our housing and zoning agent, and I asked her to provide me with information, I guess detailed information is what I put in my email, letting me know that as of January 1st of this year, how many residential dwelling units currently existed in each of those districts. Sarah replied to me that surprisingly, her office doesn't keep that detailed information. And she referred me to the assessor's office. And I was given two sheets of paper that basically listed the current residential dwelling units in each of those districts. But that won't, because they're not, this is for special permit zoning. And because those apartments are already apartments, they're grandfathered in, and it's not going to affect the existing.
So it would be in addition to whatever's in
Yes.
existence? Okay, that's why I wanted to know. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got to the number 30?
I think I can. Sorry. Well, I got to the number 30 because there are currently proposed zoning changes at the Springtown meeting. And I got 30 because 90 is a lot of units, whether they're condominiums or apartments. And I'm not an apartment snob, and I'm not a condominium snob. I was born and raised in Cambridge. I came to 30 because I thought that was a more reasonable number that people could actually accept.
I know the planning board is here, and I know they have, you've been before the planning board as well, is that correct?
I attempted to be before the planning board at their last meeting on February 27th. Unfortunately, that hearing lasted 4 hours and 51 minutes. And my zoning petition article didn't come up at the meeting until like 4 hours and 30-something minutes into the meeting. And by that time, it was midnight. And unfortunately, I was home. At 11:42, I got home. So I didn't present anything. I didn't present the reasoning behind this petition article. But it's my understanding from what I've watched from the planning board meeting that when our current planning board actually got to the various zoning amendments, they recommended this for indefinite postponement. I'm just surprised. I don't understand how the planning board could vet these zoning amendments in 20 minutes. It baffles me.
Well, I would like to hear from the planning board on what their thinking is on this and their vote. I know Abby McCabe is here and Trevor Lobenstein, chairman, so if we could just perhaps hear from one or both of you in terms of your thinking. You can stay there.
Is there a loose mic anywhere, or should I just shout? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So, yeah, my name is Trevor Lobenstein. I'm the chairman of the planning board. I'm a resident at 375 Flatboard Tree Street in Westwood, obviously. The planning board did discuss this and many other voting articles on February 27th. The planning board ultimately voted on this article and several others 4-1 to recommend indefinite postponement. And predominantly because we feel the 30 cap is too limiting for these zones of town, and that the whole point of the FMEOD is to encourage development, encourage some prosperity in these sections of town, which are sort of our village commercial districts. We are also concerned that the proposal would fail to meet the legal requirements of Mass general laws related to zoning, which perhaps Abby could elaborate on a little bit more than I can. But generally, we just feel this is not in tune with how those zoning districts are conceived to be in the current zoning, being the flexible mixed-use overlay district. So, tag on to that.
Thank you. Actually, Abby, if I could just ask you, I did see in your memo that the planning board had a concern about Mass General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 4, relative to uniform districts. Could you explain the thinking, please, on that?
Right. That really had to do with the number 30. If you recall, in the fall, the planning board did submit a similar or almost the same article, but with the change in the maximum dwelling units to 90. But the planning board had proposed that number based on a careful review and study of what could possibly be developed in the entire districts. The planning board thought 30 was too limiting, that it wouldn't pass that test with the Attorney General's office with that lower number. I also wanted to just point out that the apartments approved previously in the FMUOD in Islington Center, also the 6 in the Colburn School and the upper story residential, those would apply. They would be included in the maximum of this article for that number 30. There's a language in the proposed article that all previously approved special permits would count in that maximum.
So how many would that be in Islington now? How many exist now?
There's 12 approved in Islington in 2016, and then the 6 in High Street District.
Questions from FinCom? Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a few things. Steve Olenoff, 52 Glandor Road on the Planning Board. So the purpose of this article, the way it's been rewritten, is not at all the same as the purpose that was put forth at the town meeting last year. The purpose is never to limit the number of units. It was always to define the number of units at an amount that would be what you would expect them to be. It was presented last year because there was a lot of confusion about how many units could be allowed on these 2 FMUOD units. So our staff did a lot of calculations and figured out what exactly we would be likely to have there, and that was the number that we set to really just numify the what people could expect there, to clarify that. But it wasn't, the intention was never to limit them. This article, even though it's written the same with just a different number, actually does limit it. And it limits not only to a very unreasonable number, it'll run afoul of the uniform code of zoning. You know, everyone should have the same property rights. But if you have some people like first come, first serve, where they get their apartments on their property, and then the only reason they can't have any more is because, well, you've already exceeded some artificial limit. That's not in accordance with the zoning code. It's just it's going to obviously. I'm not an attorney. I always say that, but it just wouldn't hold up in court to have owners that, you know, say if you had an example would be if you had 100 acres of land, and you said and they're zoned for 1 acre lots, so you'd expect to get, even after roads, maybe 80 houses on there. So if you put a rule in that said, well, only 30 homes would be allowed to be built on that property, well, the first 30 people would come along and everything would be fine. But the next 50 people would be told, you can't build a house there because 30 people already did. That's just not in accordance with the law.
And if I may, Tom, I know you've got a question. I just wanted to read the statute, just the first sentence of it, because I think it would be helpful for folks to understand the statute you've referred to. So this is Chapter 40, Section 4 of Mass General Laws. It says, any zoning ordinance or bylaw which divides cities and towns into districts shall be uniform within the district for each class or kind of structures or uses permitted. So this is the statute you're referring to. Okay, Tom, you had a question?
Great, thank you. For Steve or anyone on the planning board or possibly Nora, because so my understanding at town meeting last year was that the number of 90 was more restrictive than what your analysis actually showed that area could possibly be allowed to have in terms of residential units if everything fell right, I guess, or the max number of possible units, which I think was around 140, 142. And so, so help me understand then. My understanding was that 90 was a more restrictive rule than what exists, than actually what exists now, because it's open to possibly up to 142 units or what have you based on the layout of the center. And so I guess if that's the case, then so Nada, one of the things I'm wondering about is if at town meeting 90 didn't pass, which was more restrictive than what exists today, then 30 is obviously more restrictive than 90. So there's a question in there somewhere. Is that accurate?
Okay. So let me, if I understand the question, you're asking if the 90 was more restrictive than the bylaw without the 90.
Yes.
I do not think it is. The way I came up with the 90, I had done a calculation. I came up with a straight calculation which just looked at land area, building size, and number of parking spaces. But I didn't have a way of looking at each parcel individually as to what the planning board would require in their public amenities or their setback requirements or their landscaping and circulation. I didn't have a way of looking at every parcel that way. So what I did was I made a factor that made an adjustment. And so I looked at a maximum I could see up to 149 units in the FMUOD 6 Washington Street, up to 119 units in the High Street District. In the Washington Street District, that included the town-owned parcels as well, including Morrison Park, which I do not believe there would be any opportunity to redevelop. And so that's how I came down to 90 there. And on the High Street side, I also looked at the parcels. Some of the parcels, the shape of them led me to believe that they wouldn't be developed in that same manner. So the 90 was a little bit of a stretch, but it was my best guess on what you could ever realistically see in either district to be approved by the planning board. And it was not intended to be a reduction of what the bylaw allows. The bylaw allows housing units of up to 50% of overall square footage of development in a project by special permit. So the 90 was put in there as a figure to give people an understanding of what we may someday see there. I think that 90 is even higher than what the planning board may approve, because they wouldn't approve every application that came before them. But I was comfortable that 90 was not reducing the number so that there was any applicant who couldn't apply. So I'd say that I thought 90 was the lowest we could go and still account for every parcel that may come before the planning board with an application that could be approved. So I didn't see it as a reduction.
Right. Thank you.
So I'd add just one quick add-on comment. It was something we discussed a bit with Nora at the time of that proposed amendment, was that there was a certain amount of ambiguity in the original language. That was sort of a calculation of units based on square footage or percentage of area of each development. And we just thought we were trying to sort of help the processes that are going on for these different parts of town and just make it clear to people so they won't come in and think, oh, we could have 500 units here. And say, well, no, you can't actually. You can really only get this many by the calculation, and then further, we're going to cap it at a reasonable point that's still has some sort of embedded flexibility, I guess. So.
I have a question for you, Ms. Fabrizio. So, a lot of people have talked about the land that's down by Clapper Tree Street in the Islington area, that abandoned sort of part of town. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm familiar with Clappertree and Washington Street, but no, I don't know exactly where you're talking. Are you talking under the railroad trestle?
Yeah.
Where they're leasing like truck space? Is that part of Westwood? I'm not sure. I kind of get confused between the Norwood-Westwood line. I can never differentiate between the two when I'm in that area.
How would you see if your article is to pass? Can you hear me?
I probably need the microphone. Sorry.
If your article is to pass, how do you think it would impact development in that area that is underdeveloped right now?
How would it impact that area? Personally, I think that we have unbridled development now in Westwood. I don't really have an opinion on how it would affect that part of, if it is even in the FMUOD. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about, the Dunkin' Donuts or after that.
After that.
I really don't have an answer for you, but I'd like to revisit, if I may, if you would indulge me, what Nora and Trevor and Steve and Abby were talking about. Sorry.
Take your time.
Here it is, sorry. The argument about reducing the numerical cap will put the article at risk of non-approval by the AG's office. I'm not so sure that that's the case. According to the Attorney General's office, if you read Mass General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 5, which you read Section 4, if you read Section 5, it actually authorizes municipalities to amend, add, or repeal zoning ordinances and bylaws in the manner prescribed therein. And they're saying that zoning has always been treated as a local matter. And the Attorney General's office says that because the adoption of a zoning bylaw by the voters at town meeting is both the exercise of the town's police power and a legislative act, the vote carries a strong presumption of validity. And municipalities, they have broad zoning power, and it includes the authority to preserve neighborhood aesthetics. And in the eyes of the court in Massachusetts, aesthetics alone may justify the exercise of the police power that the town has. And I think I just need to reiterate, I'm not going to revisit and hassle. I know that you guys don't want to hear about, you know, all this, how the FMUODs were created, but the residents are basically saying we're rejecting the urbanization of Westwood. I am familiar with, I think it's 1000 Washington Street, which is a part of Dedham, and it's where the Hogan Tire is on the Westwood-Dedham line at Gate Street. And you had a member of their planning board saying, I don't want to turn Dedham into a city. But when you look at all the development in Dedham, I mean, is that what we're headed to here in Westwood? I mean, and that's basically why I got the signatures and put my petition on the warrant. I think that if I get a recommendation from this commission for town meeting to vote yes for my petition, that would be wonderful, and I would be pleasantly surprised. But unfortunately, I'm not expecting that to happen. And with all due respect, I think it goes to town meeting and let the residents decide. And I think it's scare tactics with respect to whether or not the Attorney General's office will approve this. Again, municipalities have the power to make their zoning laws.
So let me get to what I really consider is the real underlying issue here. And in my opinion, I think Westwood has a dearth of affordable housing. And frankly, Boston Magazine came out with an interesting article on the scarcity of affordable housing in the whole metropolitan Boston area. In fact, Westwood, if you look at the increase from 2016 to 2017, for existing homeowners, has seen a very nice average increase in property values. But I think that, you know, we do not have sufficient affordable housing in this town. And to me, I've sensed this underlying opposition to whether it's apartments or condominiums. I think we have 5,000 plus homes here in this town, 15,000 residents, and adding up to 90 affordable apartments or condominiums in Washington Street, Islington, or in this part of town seems to me to be, I view it as progress. And I take a little, I want to take task at your question as saying that the residents are strongly opposed to the urbanization of Westwood. I was driving down 109, I was looking at some of these homes and the dates 1848, 1846. I said to myself, I wonder what would happen to this town if those people back then decided that there should be no more growth and development in the town of Westwood. Where would we be today? And I think we have an obligation to cherish what we have, but also recognize that other people, we need to make opportunity available for other people to move into this town. Right now, it's not an affordable town. And so to me, I thought what the planning board attempted to do last year was to calm the fears that people put up pictures of 500 units or 1,200 units being built on Washington Street. And I think what Nora tried to do is say, look, that can't happen. If we do our calculations, somewhere around 90 units on both sides of town is reasonable. And I think the thought was that would give people a sense of relief to say we're not going to have 10,000 units coming to town. But the other thing you may want to note, and I know there's been some criticism of what's happening in Dedham, read the article in Boston Magazine. Downtown Dedham has become incredibly vibrant. New businesses are coming in, restaurants are opening up. In fact, I've gone there a lot. Read what the article says. They've actually hit a home run. People thought that Legacy Place would destroy downtown Dedham. They've had the reverse happen. Downtown Dedham has become vibrant again in terms of the community. So I think if you want to see a vibrant community in Islington, and you want to see a vibrant community in this part of town, to me it's something other than the strip mall we have with the post office. And I think at some point in time, I think reasonable, affordable units coming into Islington or coming into town center here, in my opinion, would be welcome. And I do not believe that anyone can say, I can't say everybody in town is in favor of it. I don't think anybody else getting up here could say that everybody in town is opposed to it. And maybe town meeting is the right place to let people decide if they are willing to let affordable units come in, apartments or condominiums come into this town.
May I respond to that, please? I think you're mistaken. That's my personal opinion.
Maybe your opinion.
Westwood does not have affordable housing because when you look around, all the houses are being built that are multi-million-dollar homes. The town, the planning board, I understand it's built by right or whatever it is, but of course, I mean, you have all these multi-million-dollar homes, and I'm pro everybody has to live somewhere. Again, this is way too much development for the town of Westwood. We're not a city. Like you said, we have 5,000 homes. We have 15,000 residents. And when I said, I didn't say all the residents are opposed. I said a significant number of residents are rejecting the urbanization of Westwood. And it's as simple as that. They're rejecting the urbanization. If I wanted 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, when I bought my home, if I wanted to live in a high-density area, I could have bought anywhere in Cambridge, but I decided to make Westwood my home. And I personally, I'm not speaking for anyone else, I'm speaking for myself. Westwood is being destroyed with all this development. University Station, in addition to being $2 million of 2 million acres of environmental blight, I find, and I've been reading, it's a disappointment. And I think because we're not seeing the net fiscal benefit from University Station, now Westwood Center and Islington Center are on the sites. They're right in the crosshairs for the development. And again, it's a residential area. It's not a highway. We're not a city. And Dedham, I would argue that I don't think that your perception of Dedham Center is my perception of Dedham Center. It's all what people see. And again, I think I understand respectfully, I probably won't get your recommendation. So all I can say is let this be a town meeting and see what happens when people vote.
Are there any, Mike and then Jim?
Yeah, I'd like to ask probably Nora a question. It's really a couple of procedural questions. First of all, if this were to pass as is, how does that impact the current plans that are being considered in Islington Center right now?
If it passed as is, and it allows for up to 30 units in Islington Center, there are 12 units there, and there are 18 proposed under the current proposal. There would be no additional units that would be available
Okay.
for a special permit anywhere else in Islington.
What's proposed now would fit within this?
It would.
Okay. Now, another procedural question. If the town does pass this article, and we have a cap of 30, and let's say in 2 or 3 years, another development opportunity comes up. We heard at once before FinCom, what happens if Roach Brothers goes away and we want to put something there? What's the process for amending the bylaw to take the number up to 90 or 150 at that point?
It would be another zoning amendment, so the same process we're going through today. It may not be a petitioner amendment, it may be an amendment that came from the planning
So a
board.
developer could come maybe to the planning board, propose it, then come to us or the selectmen, and we'd take it in front of town meeting, and it would require a 2/3 vote.
It would, right, and then the time to go through the town meeting process and the Attorney General's approval process.
Okay. So I'm not putting words in your mouth, but it sounds to me like to some degree you're proposing effectively a circuit breaker. You're sort of saying, at this 30, presumably if the town supports the new development, any new development with residential would require us to come back in front of town meeting through the formal process to do a zoning amendment to amend this article again to a higher number. So we'd stop and pause and say, we're at 30, we're capped. If we want to go to 50 or 100 or 200, we have to stop and go through this process. You're really, I think, proposing a procedural circuit breaker that stops the process and brings the town together to talk about it one more time. That's really what you're proposing.
I think this will slow down the rushing and the railroading of development coming in, whether it's commercial development, residential development. It's just going to slow things down. I mean, these meetings are happening 10 minutes before a meeting. It's revised. It's a revised meeting. These public hearings are public hearings, and people are speaking at these public hearings. At the planning board meeting on February 27th, which was what, last week, over 100 people showed up. They're concerned about what's happening in these FMUOD districts, and not University Station, and I don't even know where FMUOD 1 is. I have no idea what that is. But it's 6 and 7. We live here. We're trying to preserve our quality of life. And I think if we can slow things down and be methodical, it just seems like, and not only to me, there are other people that I can speak for, everything is rushed. Everything is being rushed. I was at the planning board meeting on the 27th, and I heard members of the planning board saying they're waiting on the Board of Selectmen, and members of the Board of Selectmen saying they're waiting on the planning board. So the planning board is looking at all these zoning articles, 20 minutes, maybe, 19 minutes. And they're recommending to this commission, yeah, we're going to give you the go-ahead. So, yes, we're voting yes. I don't think it was properly vetted. I understand that a lot of residents come, but residents have concerns, and their concerns are, they're falling on deaf ears, and I don't mean a pun. That's no pun intended. Overwhelmingly at these meetings, residents want to know, they want a slow process. They don't like things rushed through, because when things are rushed through, you end up with something that you really didn't want. And again, I know I'm just going on and kind of rambling here, but we want to preserve our quality of life.
Jim?
I think Mike captured the intent of my question, but to follow up on Mr. Olenoff's statement, he talked about putting a limit on it and then people rushing to get into that limit, and everyone else is basically out of luck. In essence, that's what we did last year with the ancillary apartments. We had a limit of 45 apartments. We reached that max, and then people proposed going up over that, and we waived it. So I think, and then of course what Nora said, whether we pick 30 or 90, you know, at some point in the future, we can erase that and start again anyway.
Any other questions from FinCom? Yeah, Mike.
See a number of members of the planning board here. Says the vote was 4-1. I'm interested in hearing from the one.
time. My name is Brian Gorman. I'm on the planning board. So I essentially voted yes for this for a lot of the reasons that you've heard tonight. The only additional one would be just to reiterate that if there was to need to be an increase, we would just go through the same type of process as we're talking about tonight. Well, you'll see that there's other planning board zoning amendments that are also addressed for this particular project here. So we do have zoning articles that come up as projects come forward, so it's not unusual to make modifications to the bylaws in that way. And I would also like to let the residents make their decision on this. There's a lot of decisions one way or another. The 2/3 threshold is pretty high to reach. So I mean, if it was to reach that 2/3, then that's pretty resounding for a town meeting. And then the other thing for that is to respond to Steve Olenoff's concern about the OG's office. As far as that, if we do vote in favor of that, then send it to the Attorney Generals and let them decide. That's how I feel. But particularly for this, I respect resident petition articles, and I believe that they should be addressed just like any other board amendments, and let them go to town meeting and let the town decide. And that's all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
from
Mary Ann, I have one
Frank
more question.
Humphrey?
I just want to ask, maybe to get some clarification. In these two districts, what kinds of development in Islington and High Street are you opposed to?
I'm opposed to overdevelopment. We have, I don't know the exact address. Nora would know. The building beside, the building beside Islington Pizza. 321 Washington. There are 2 dentist offices there. I'm opposed. Why do we need 2 dentist offices? The residents took, from what I understand, and I wasn't part of it, which, you know what, shame on me. There were surveys on what the residents wanted. And from the early surveys, residents wanted open space. And they wanted mom and pop boutiques. They didn't want Kmart's and Targets and big box stores. And we end up with 2 dentist offices. Doesn't make sense to me.
So you don't want dentist offices, what you're telling me?
I don't think we need dentist offices.
What I'm trying to understand very honestly here is what don't you want to see in Islington, and what don't you want to see in the center of town? You're sort of restricting residential units with your count there. Now you're telling me you don't like dentists. What I'm trying to understand is what is it you don't want to see? What is it you feel that's overwhelming the town of Westwood, in Islington and in the town center? I don't understand I'm trying to understand what you're worried about.
What I'm worried about is when I attended the meeting, and I think the planning board, the members that are here will attest to the fact, the traffic study, every option, if you will, that they presented on the traffic studies, they got Fs. But yet this project in Islington Center is going to be pushed through, and the traffic problems unaddressed.
That we've already heard here, that if that project goes through, it's part of your 30. The question I'm asking you, because at the end of the day, you're asking town meeting to put a limit in place because you're very concerned about the over-urbanization, the over-development of Westwood. I'm trying to honestly find out, what is it you're worried about that's going to happen on High Street, and what is it you're worried about that's going to happen in Islington?
That we're going to have huge structures of condominiums and apartments that we don't need. And that's my opinion.
All right.
I think at this point, I'm going to open it up to residents for questions and comments, and I see Chairman Lobenstein has his hand up. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. It's too early for me to make that mistake.
Again.
I apologize. Please state your name and where you live.
David Atkins.
Thank you. My apologies.
David Atkins, 85. 85 Parker Street, member of the Planning Board. I just wanted to address the comparison to the accessory apartments because it sounded like a very resonant idea that this sort of a circuit breaker but it's much more than a circuit breaker because with the accessory apartments there was a limit, and once that limit is increased, it's a simple application for a permit and it's approved administratively. A big purpose behind the flexible multiple use overlay district is to attract proposals for development, with the idea that they would then go before the planning board, and the planning board would review those proposals, and with the discretionary review decide, 45 apartments, too much, and maybe we can talk to the developer, maybe it'll become 18 condos. I mean, it starts a process of review. So I think that if you were to basically stop this completely, it's not just putting the brakes on it, it's ending the potential for starting that conversation again. So I think it's a key difference there is that the planning board retains the discretionary review of these to say, what's the right number? I supported our proposal for 90, and I did see it as a limit. I don't think the legal argument, I don't know, but the issue was that 30 was such a dramatically lower amount that would effectively kill flexible development in these centers. And so I think that's important to not see it as just a circuit breaker or putting the brakes on temporarily, because it's really equivalent. I think it would be equivalent to repealing the FMUOD altogether, which, I mean, if people are really strongly against this kind of development, they could bring a petition article to the next town meeting and say, repeal the whole thing and end any kind of mixed-use development. So I don't want to go there, but I think it's important to recognize that it's not just a sort of a pause button. It would change the dynamic, and it'd be another 10 years before anything came along.
Thank you. Yes, Chairman Hickey.
Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm John Hickey. I live at 117 Sunrise Road. I had the pleasure this past year of serving as the chair of the Board of Selectmen. And I just really want to take everybody back a minute to the genesis of the warrant article that we had in September. And we have a societal issue. You're all aware of that. People enter public discourse and they make things up. And suddenly they become fact. As we've sat here this evening, we've heard people talk about the profitability of Westwood Station in the negative. That's just factually inaccurate. But it's now been said, and that's what happens. That's what we're dealing with. So in June of 2017 at the Thurston Middle School, we had a public hearing regarding Islington and the development of Islington. And a resident got up and he said he had done some back-of-the-envelope math. And by his back-of-the-envelope math, he had come up with housing units well into the hundreds. I don't even want to repeat the number, because as you can see, things are taken out of context and run with. We have been subject to anonymous online postings, anonymous online Facebook postings, all sorts of issues where, regrettably, even in Westwood, where we participate in civil discourse, people have engaged in very underhanded ways of making things up, generating tension, and running with it. But the biggest issue we had entering last fall's town meeting was that this residence number had become fact. People were running with this number. And so our effort was solely to create clarity. We went to town meeting and we said, we really don't care if the number is going to be 90 or 90-ish, but we had a subject matter expert take a look at what was available to build and come up with a number that was a defensible number and it had logic. And so the driver was clarity. It was an attempt to deal with all sorts of misinformation that unfortunately we're dealing with. To now look at a number that is solely restrictive, although the warrant article looks the same and has only been changed by number, the intent is very different. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of the background of how that occurred and how we got to this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from residents? Yes, I see two hands here.
Yeah, hi, good evening. My name is Maura Van Wagenen, and I live at 181 Canton Street. I am an Islington resident. I've been there for 23 years, and I want to try to be supportive to both sides. I think in terms of, you know, what we're looking for in Islington Center is an area where we'll attract neighbors to go to, places, you know, like you talk about Dedham downtown. They've done a wonderful job. It's all restaurants. It's a gathering place. No ill speaking to dentist office, but I mean, you go there and you go out. It's not a place for people to gather, and I think that's what the people in Westwood are looking for. I think you probably may even find the 325 Washington Street that a lot of people are pleasantly surprised in terms of how that did turn out. But I think, you know, looking at large numbers of whatever kind of housing, whether it turns into condos now or apartments, yes, people do need a place to live, but they need a place to hang around. So I think what really the main issue is to be done tastefully. I think, you know, in terms of Dedham, you know, they've made huge high-rises there. I mean, yes, they have their downtown that they have maintained. You know, it's really a quaint little village, and I think really that is what we're really looking for, and to really keep that into consideration when you're putting it all together.
Thank you. I think there was a hand up.
I just wanted to add to that. I mean, one of my really big concerns, we talk about the two dental areas there. I'm really concerned CVS. I mean, we're developing a medical center downtown Islington. You know, they are going to be turning into healthcare providers, and so you're really kind of setting that a little bit. So again, just in terms of the tenants, I mean, I'm not opposed. I know CVS is probably a wonderful commercial property and business to have, but please size and, you know, gathering places for people.
I think there was a hand up behind you, Ms. Conant.
I'm Debbie Conant, 21 Strasser Ave. I think, as you all expressed, the beauty of this article is that it can be changed at any time. And with the potential changes in the classification of residential versus commercial with, for example, Epcot, I believe it is, this is a really good time to pause and just limit the amount of housing until we see what the classifications will be, because we're going to be scrambling to try to fit in affordable housing if they do reclassify that. We'll have too much residential. So we go with the 30, we let the town decide, and we can bring it up again. We can always revisit these things. They're not etched in stone. So I hope that you do support her article and let the town decide. And in terms of the 90 not being accepted at town meeting, there was a lot of confusion because they thought that by not voting for the 90, they'd get a lower number. They didn't realize that the 90, it was a double-edged sword, basically. And they thought by voting against it, it was protecting them because they want less than 90.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from residents? Yes, ma'am.
Christine Privatera, 16 Dean Street. I'd like to address a couple of points. One, I fully support, I can't remember her last name.
Fabrizio.
The petitioner's article, because I agree with the prior comment. There was confusion last year at town meeting, and people, and I don't speak for all, but I speak for many residents because I have spoken to many residents of Islington, are concerned about the number of residences, whether it's condos or apartments. We don't like the size as proposed. It's just too overwhelming for the area. And I want to address, somebody had commented from the FinCom about we need more affordable housing. Well, the fact is only 10%, or Nora can tell me exactly the percentage, a small percentage will be affordable. So for somebody to say we need all this affordable housing, that's not true. Most of it will be market value.
Thank you. Chris, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I had a question for Nora, if she could elaborate. If this were to go through, it would effectively render FMUOD 6 no longer a mixed-use opportunity. Is that right? Sorry, wait for the microphone to reach you.
If this went through, other than the project that's currently before
Right.
the planning board, there would be no other residential units that would be available under an FMUOD special permit. Someone could still apply for an FMUOD special permit, but you're taking away the incentive, because the main incentive in that district is having a mixed-use development. And that's a lot of what they get out of an FMUOD special permit, the ability to have residential use for up to 50%.
And when was the last time Islington did not have that distinction of mixed-use availability?
I believe
For a
it was
commercial mixed use.
2015 when
2015?
the residential uses were added. May 2015.
So if this passes, we return back to the years before 2015, in
Correct.
essence.
Correct.
What was the attractability or attraction of developers? What was the appeal for developers to redevelop Islington prior to 2015?
There's been very little interest in Islington, except for with the project that was approved about a year ago and the project that we're looking at right now, both of which are FMUOD projects that involve residential uses as well as commercial. So you can look down Washington Street and you can see a number of tired old commercial structures, many of them vacant, that have not been developed, and we have been unable to attract developers to redo those parcels. We're hoping that we will, and we believe that the residential commercial mixed use is the best way to do that. That's why we asked town meeting to add residential as a use in the two FMUOD downtown districts.
So I've also heard a resident say, we can always revisit this later. If this were to establish the 30 as the cap, and I believe Mr. Gorman also mentioned, if it reaches 2/3, that's a pretty high threshold. It can be difficult to achieve. If we are at 30 and we get a developer who is interested and we don't achieve the 2/3 at town meeting, what's your sense of the likelihood of achieving 2/3 to revisit this, to then bump it up to 60 or whatever a new possible development may be looking at?
So 2/3 is a high bar, as it should be for zoning changes. Every time we go to the town meeting with a zoning change and we need 2/3, we go there because we have a zoning proposal that we think the town needs. Otherwise, we wouldn't be even making the effort to do that. My concern with the description as a stopgap measure is that that's not how we use zoning. I agree that that's what we have done with accessory apartments. We've done that because it was the only way to get accessory apartments approved back in the, I think it was the early 1990s, when the first accessory apartment bylaw was passed. And it was specifically limited to 1% because it was something new in town, and the town wanted to take it gradually. When we saw we were approaching that number, we came back and asked for another %. We could have asked to just remove the cap entirely, but we didn't think people were ready for that, so we asked to go up to another 1%. We did that when we were approaching the cap, when we knew that we were getting close, and that's for residential uses. That's something nice to have, but not a necessity. It's not at all the same thing as looking at commercial redevelopment. Commercial redevelopment takes an immense amount of time and effort and capital on the part of a developer that we're going out seeking for coming into the area and improving the town. If we were to tell developers that we'll start talking to them and we'll put this through a town meeting process, and maybe we'll get on the next warrant, and maybe we'll get 2/3, and then we'll get to the Attorney General's office, and then come back and talk to us again 6, 8, 9 months down the line, I think that has a dampening effect on exactly what we're trying to do. One of the reasons we passed the flexible multiple use overlay district was to streamline the process and to take obstacles away, to encourage developers to come and present a project that could be considered on its merits, to allow the planning board to look at a project and determine if it makes sense for the town and for the neighborhood it's in. If it does, a special permit can be approved. If it doesn't make sense, it can be altered, and if you can get to a point where everyone agrees, it'll get the special permit. And if you can't get to that point, if you don't have a project that's good for the town and good for the neighborhood, the planning board can simply deny the special permit. That's what they're elected to do. So I just believe it's poor planning to use zoning as a mechanism to put a breaker on development. I think you should zone appropriate to the type of development that you're looking for. Create your zones to allow that level of development and live within the level that you've chosen.
We're going to need to move on to our other articles. Any other comments or questions from residents on this? Yes.
Debbie Conant, 21 Strasser Ave. How does this, you know, they say if we reduce the number, we're taking the flexible out of flexible multi-use districts. How does this differ from the fact that they just reduced the number of housing at university? Are they essentially not doing the same thing? So I don't know who to pose that question to.
Is there someone who would like to address that? Nora?
We actually did not reduce the number at University. University Station University Station has an FMUOD district, FMUOD 1, but it also has the University Station Multiple Use Overlay District that was specifically written for that project in conjunction with the developer, and it allows up to 650 units of housing. That zoning amendment, that zoning article has not been amended. It still allows 650 units of housing there. The town recently is in the process. The selectmen approved a memorandum of understanding for a development agreement amendment that will talk about how you get to the remaining units of housing. But we have not proposed a zoning amendment to change that, and we hadn't intended to do that either. So,
Ms. Fabrizio, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
With that, we're going to move on to the school committee article, and we have Superintendent Emily Parks with us and Heath Traka, Director of Finance for Westwood Public Schools. Welcome. Thank you. So welcome. So you are here on the school borrowing for funding for MSBA eligibility process. You've been before us already on this. I think it might be helpful, though, for folks who haven't heard from you before. You know, our public hearing is usually more widely watched and attended as tonight, maybe for a brief summary, so folks watching can get up to speed.
Oh my God, sorry. Try to turn that off.
Studying our school buildings, specifically our elementary buildings. And we did a master plan with architects.
It's right there. If you see the green, just push that towards you. And that is the microphone. There you go.
Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, that's perfect.
Wow.
So we actually don't need the handheld, that can float.
All right, good.
That's great.
Okay, so I'll repeat that. Over the past few years, we've been studying our elementary buildings. And we had a master plan study done by our architects, Sims, Manny, and McKee, as part of the process of seeing where, especially our aging elementary schools, Deerfield, Hanlon, and the Sheehan stand. And the result of that was we decided to put in what's called a statement of interest with the state. So we identified all of sort of the both educational issues as well as the infrastructure issues with those buildings. We submitted the SOI last year with the MSBA, which is the Mass School Building Authority, and they accepted our invitation, and we got invited into their what's called a core building program with the state. And so as part of that program, there are different phases. The first phase is the eligibility phase, and as part of that eligibility phase, one of the requirements is to secure funding for the next phase, which is feasibility and design. And so this phase starts for us as of June 1st, and this is a program that will potentially reimburse us a great deal of the cost of whatever the construction project is. And that hasn't been defined as of yet because we still have a lot of communication to do with the community and making sure that we end up with a construction project that everybody wants.
So I would just add to that, that we feel that we have a tremendous opportunity here potentially. The fact that we were invited into this process with MSBA and could potentially reap significant reimbursement either for renovation or construction to deal with some of our aging buildings. The phase that we've been asked into, the eligibility phase, one of the deliverables for this 9-month period would be an appropriation to go into the next phase, which would be the feasibility study. And that's when we need the funding to be engaging in an initial kind of schematic design process. And so that's what this warrant article is for that initial appropriation.
Which is how much?
1.75.
Up to 1.75 million, a borrowing article.
Questions from FinCom?
Yeah. What percentage of the MSBA funding would that be for the overall project?
So we don't know the precise percentage yet, but it starts at about 32%, and then there's the possibility of getting some additional percents based on some incentives that they have. So if you come up with the green design, for instance, then they would give you additional reimbursement. If you can demonstrate some things about your history maintaining buildings, there's some incentive points to be gained that way.
Yeah, Jim and then Tom.
Just real quick, last meeting you estimated the request to be $1 to $1.5 million. It's jumped to 1.75. Can you expound on
Sure.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we've been working with the MSBA on that figure, as well as our architects, as well as they've given us what other districts that are in the pipeline as well, and what they're sort of going for. MSBA won't just give you the figure. You have to we have to come up with it ourselves, and so that's why we look to our architects to say, okay, what would it cost for this? And the 4 major areas that is comprised in that number is the OPM, which is the owner's project manager, the designer, environmental and site testing, and other. So the biggest part of that biggest chunk of that money is the designer and the OPM, basically.
The bottom line is that we've done a lot more work since we talked to you before,
Yeah.
and
More concrete number.
and we have a more
Yeah.
concrete number. Yeah, exactly.
So 32% is the minimum reimbursement level? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's
right?
correct. Is
Yeah,
that
31,
right?
32.
31,
32.
Yeah.
And are there any other, I know that beyond that is vague at this point, but are there any other towns, projects that could be used as comps that have different reimbursal rates than that you could maybe potentially compare to?
Yeah, I mean, I think we we've explored that a little bit, and we can continue to do that. I mean, I do want to emphasize that they have sort of a formula on these incentive points. It doesn't get a great deal higher than 31, 32%. So, I don't think we'll get to 50. I think we're really looking at in that general
Right.
vicinity.
Because that's Blue Hills was closer to, and I know that was a different.
It was a different
project, but
yeah.
So, right. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Other questions from FinCom? Yeah, Howard.
What do we actually get for $1.75 million? What is the deliverable? And if it's $200 an hour, that's an awful lot of hours for someone to be saying, yes, it's feasible.
Yeah. So it's these things Heath was just referring to.
Right, it's the owner's project manager, the designer is the most expensive. So this is for the feasibility phase and feasibility/design phase. So once a project is designated, once we know what we're going to be doing, then that's part of the design.
We get architectural plans for this?
Yes.
Okay, so it's more than a feasibility study.
It's feasibility/design.
Early in the process, someone might come and say, this isn't feasible, and you haven't spent anywhere near this amount of money.
Oh, right.
Okay.
It's up to that amount of money.
Okay.
It's up to 1.75.
Okay, so we actually, fine.
Yeah, it's not like
Right.
it's spent,
Okay, questions or comments from residents? I do not see any. Anything else from FinCom on this? I know it's the second time. Yeah, Barb?
So really, what you're getting is like when we do the design plans for the police station or the fire station, the one difference is that you're interfacing with the school building assistance
States, yeah.
people.
Exactly.
So, but it's the same sort of thing as getting design plans.
Right.
It's very prescribed, the whole process.
Okay, well, thank you very much
Thank you.
for being here.
All right, thank you.
Superintendent Mr. Petracca, thank you very much. And we will move on to the Board of Selectmen articles.
You don't throw enough zeros at it.
Yeah.
You know.
It's gonna work out okay.
Yeah, I'll do the road.
Chairman Hickey, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Hickman, Mr. Gillette, Ms. Hyde. Chief. Welcome, everyone. So I know that you have a number of articles that are before us tonight and some that will be coming, as I understand.
Correct.
And I'm sure you'll address that.
As we go through them. I'm going to turn most of this over to Pam, right, for the typical pro forma ones. Right? So we start with I mean, a lot of this is
The road improvement. So the road improvement project is the request that we have traditionally to seek authorization to accept any state money, primarily it's Chapter 90 money to every city and town. Roads are primarily used to maintain our roadways. But in addition to that, in past years, we've gotten money for doing sidewalks under the sidewalk program. We recently received money from a developer and from the town to do the intersection of Clapboard Tree Street, which we're about to embark on. So this is giving authority to do all of those projects under one article. There may be separate projects with separate funding sources, but this gives us the authority. It also has embedded in it the ability for the Board of Selectmen to go forward with a minor land taking. We're not talking about something major that's going to cost a fortune. In fact, it's oftentimes something that the landowner will just donate to us. That was done on the sidewalk project that was done in the Dallas area. And a number of landowners gave us little strips of land in front of their homes, or easements in front of their homes, so we can go forward with that sidewalk project. And that's what this is all about. So it requires a 2/3 vote because of that language, because of the taking ability. But other than that, this is just a straightforward article.
Same article we have every year. Questions from FinCom? Questions, comments from residents? It's really pro forma, this one. Okay, does that bring us to, I think the next one we have is the Chief's article?
Chief Decker's article regarding the removal of snow and ice around fire hydrants.
Okay, so one of the first jobs as a new fire chief when I came to town was to do a hazard assessment of the community. And I pretty much got my feet running pretty quick. We were pretty busy. And then we got the storm of January 4th. And I had gotten confronted several times when I was out in the public by residents about why our firefighters were not out shoveling hydrants. And it concerned me a little bit that that was one of the first questions that I was being asked, that it's a situation where when I was driving around town, a lot of people were out digging out their own hydrants. They were doing a fabulous job. But there was an expectation from the public that it was part of the fire department's responsibility. And we do need those fire hydrants when it snows, and we don't have time to dig them out. So for me, it was very important to look and see what we had and why it wasn't being enforced. And I noticed DPW had all of their stuff where if people plowed out snow into the street, there were fines and penalties. And I started doing a lot of research here, in Massachusetts and also in Connecticut, where I came from, and felt that I think it would be very important for us to put a bylaw in place where we, the residents, the fire department is part of those individuals, put a ordinance in place to make sure that those hydrants were taken care of in advance, because the fire department just does not have the staffing or the time to do it in a timely fashion. Now, you're all probably saying, well, what have you guys done for the last 100 years? Well, we were doing Neighbors for Neighbors, and you're going to see some bigger campaigns from the fire department on that. We were out there trying to do our best, helping out where we could fit in, but our call volume has just exploded. And we can't afford to do that. We can't put those people into the street because they're out doing their primary care of delivering emergency services. So what's our next step? That's getting neighbors involved in doing this. So we put this together and we're massaging the language a little bit, and part of it is basically an educational opportunity for the fire department to let people know, hey, we need some help. Now, the school system has done a phenomenal job getting out there with their teams and making competition, so a lot of these hydrants get done. We go out and hit a lot of the ones on the major thoroughways and the dangerous streets because we have all the equipment that can do that. So that's that neighbor helping neighbor. So what we're really now looking for is all the neighbors to get together and work together to do this. So we came up with this language. Most likely, you'll never see any money generated from this. So if we're looking at this as a fundraising event for the community, it's not. It's an educational opportunity. What it allows us to do is have the teeth behind it, just as parents. Many of us are parents in the room. When you tell your kid, hey, if you don't do this, I'm taking away the Game Boy, that's why you have to have some type of penalty behind it. The real penalty here is education. We're going to have a letter that we can hand out. It's an opportunity to speak with people, educate people on the importance, team up your neighbors to get it done. That's why it's there. And I'm also, I think that the language that you may have in front of you, we changed where it says the fire chief or their designee is the one enforcing this. So we will not have police officers driving around town giving out tickets to do this. Again, it's a teachable moment. I can tell you in my 21 years in the community that I came from before, I can't think of once. We had an ordinance. I can't think of once where we actually find someone for doing it. We handed out the ordinance, we had the education, and most people were thankful for the education because they didn't realize you mow around it. Some people plant flowers around them, but no one thought about shoveling them out until you have a fire at your house. And then the question is, why wasn't it shoveled? And when we show up with 3 people, that's your first people coming to your home, we don't have time to dig that hydrant out and put the fire out at the same time, so we need your help. So that's why we have this.
Thank you, Chief. Questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering about, okay, so we're talking about residents, trying to do this. What about the plow operators, not DPW, but there's a lot of independent plow operators. I've seen them just come across the street and plow wherever they want to plow. And now it seems like the residents could be stuck with what these independent plow people are doing in their neighborhood, because I see it in my neighborhood.
And I think that's a modification to what the DPW already has in place, any of that piling up, where if we catch them piling up, then I think the DPW has a $300 fine to do that. I think the same thing will be put into place to handle that also. So the goal is really, if you look at that big storm that we had, and we may get another one this week, it's rare on those smaller storms that they hit the threshold that I put in where it needs to be 4 inches below the lowest intake. It's rare. Most of the time we can get to them. It's when these big storms hit that we need people to be prepping and thinking, and really be thinking about it. So that's the goal of that. But yes, we do need to take care of those nice contractors that like to pile up on it, because that's where you're going to need some help digging those out.
Other questions from FinCom?
Yeah, what if the resident is unable, is elderly, disabled?
Right. Now, if they're already having their driveways and walks plowed by someone, they would just add that on. If that's not feasible, that's where that neighbors helping neighbors concept that you're going to see grow out of the fire department. We're doing it already. You're going to see a bigger campaign for that. We'll take those case-by-case basis and see if we can do it, or facilitate working with the neighbors to go in with that neighbors helping neighbor concept. So if you had an elderly person that couldn't do it, maybe there's some high school kids living next door that could easily do it for them. So it's the whole purpose behind it's a campaign to get it accomplished, so it's taken care of within the first 24 hours.
So are you gonna have a specific, identify all the fire hydrants and basically assign them out so that no hydrant is gonna be an orphan on some street and get wedged in? That
The way we're looking at it right now is that the abutting property which that hydrant sits on, those individuals would be ultimately responsible for that hydrant. Now, again, that goes back to talking with your neighbors. You might be away, so getting it done. There'll be town properties that the fire department will put that on our shoulders to help the neighbors with that. We'll know what those hydrants are, so those will be ours to do. And then those one-offs that we find. We have technology in the trucks that tell us where the hydrants are, close, within 3 or 4 feet. Again, there's posts on some of them. I'm meeting with the Dedham Westwood Water Company next week. We're gonna talk about reposting all of them so you can see them when they're buried with 3 feet. So we'll know where they are. But again, when time matters, we come to the fire with 750 gallons of water. That's all we bring. We need more when we get there, and we need it in the first 3 minutes. So we don't have a lot of time to be digging a hydrant and putting fires out at the same time. So we have to capitalize on that. That's why we have to have those open.
I'm looking behind your shoulder and I see Todd Corchin. And does DPW have any ability to help out? I mean, I know it's right after you've plowed for a storm, but, to help out with any of those hydrants?
I think there are probably occasions where we could lend a hand here or there, but to be quite honest with you, we're pretty much straight out after a storm with crosswalks and everything else in town that by the time we could even get to those, it probably wouldn't be in a timely enough fashion.
Yeah, the big thing is the bandwidth that we have and that they have, even with their contractors. And from what I've seen, they do a great job on the streets and stuff, but now you're tacking that on, and we want that 24-hour window, and his folks have been up for the last 48 hours. So it's a tough one to row to hoe. But I can tell you from driving around town after the first big storm, I would say a good 40 to 50% of the hydrants are already being done. It's now a question of getting the other 60 to 50% in there.
Julie and then Peter? Yeah.
So we talked a bit about your neighbors helping neighbors in the municipal conversation. I guess my question is, could that initiative move forward without this article? So could you drive that 40% to 60, 80, 90% without having this penalty in place?
The fire department for years, through Deputy Chief Reardon, has been doing a phenomenal job trying to drive that message out to the public. And in some cases, it has fallen on deaf ears. So our goal is, and the reason I went for the penalty in there, again, something has to have teeth behind it if you really want to get it accomplished. So the teeth are there, but again, it's that educational component where if someone just keeps giving you pushback after push, you have a mechanism. Because other than that, there's nothing. There's no follow-through.
Yeah, I do think people are concerned if they're unable, if you just had knee surgery, you were fine 2 weeks before, you're on vacation, you know what I mean? And while the intent isn't to penalize people, I do think the initial reaction from the public is, it seems pretty strict. Well, people, I think, agree with where you want to go with it. The idea of having an article with a dollar sign attached to it kind of seems drastic at this stage.
I can respect that.
Peter and then Tom?
No, Julie really kind of addressed what I was going to say, so.
Chief, there are community service letters that you guys give to, say, high school kids or the kids that might go around town and dig out hydrants. Is that, or is that, if not, is that something that we could do? Maybe that would motivate more kids. I think all high school kids should be doing that.
Yeah, we have done that with other events and tried to get for the community service. It just hasn't really materialized. We can work closer with the school system to look at that, and other organizations to do that, as we move forward. But right now, I would say that campaign we did on social media and challenging you know, the cross-country team versus the football team versus the hockey team. They did a great job. Right by the high school, all those hydrants got done. So if you lived by the high school, that was a great place to live, because those kids got some work done.
Right.
But it's in all the other parts of town where we just needed to be on somebody's idea. And what I was seeing is a lot of people have their driveways being plowed by someone already. So just have your contractor take a quick swipe and get it down. It takes care of the issue.
Oh, yes,
At what level of accumulation does this become a real issue?
Normally on your storms of 8 to 10 inches, because most of the hydrants, if you look at them in driving around town now that there's no snow on the ground, most of those large orifices, the large output orifices, are about 10 to 12 inches off the ground. So you have to have, because we're looking at anything within 4 inches, so you're looking at about a 10-inch storm. Which here we are in the Northeast, yeah, do we get them? Yep, but not as frequently as we used to when I was a kid. You know, so it's not as frequent.
We've been able to develop any data that would indicate how many of these hydrants aren't being addressed?
I can only go from the 120 days that I've been here or so in the one storm. And when I was looking at it, driving around town, it was about every other hydrant that I was looking at other than in the high school area.
How many hydrants are in town?
605, but there's probably more like 625, because I've already found 2 that weren't in our GIS system in my driving around. So we're updating that all the time. So it's about
600-ish.
600-ish.
Before we open this up to residents, we all received a letter from someone who couldn't be here this evening. I'm just going to summarize what he set forth. This is from Mr. Ernie Greppin at 490 Gay Street, and he wrote to tell us that he is an 82-year-old resident. He said in the past, removal of snow and ice around the hydrants was done by Dedham Westwood Water. Why can't that continue? Maybe you can address that. But he said chief among his concerns is the safety of the individuals who will be attempting to remove ice and snow from around the hydrant near their property. You know, he makes clear that although he can do this, he's wondering if other folks his age can do that. And he thinks that it's a grave safety issue created for a person clearing snow on a busy street, such as Gay Street, where he lives, especially when a plowed embankment gets plowed over, it hardens during the day, and he questions, you know, the safety of being able to do that on a busy street, and also raises the issue of being away. So you've partly addressed that, but I mean, there are a lot of folks in town who live on busy streets. How can we keep people safe?
Most of the time, even if we're out shoveling hydrants, most of the time, we're not gonna be in the street ourselves. I mean, in some cases, we don't drive the big trucks with us. We park one of our smaller vehicles, because we're hiring somebody in off on overtime to do this. They're throwing a shovel in the back of one of the cars. They're gonna jump out, they're gonna park in front, it would be the same way. And we always ask that people start from the inside and shovel out. So you're never in the street. It's not a good place to be anyways when you do that. So that's how we train our folks to start shoveling. And then you're never out in the street. And then you put a car there to protect yourself so you don't get hit by someone not paying attention to it.
There are some places that don't have sidewalks though, right? So
But yeah, it's part of their yard. You would just walk out in the yard and shovel away at that area. I mean, that's how we do it, you know, if we're out there and able to do it. And we would identify those real big hazards. Again, we can't do 600-ish hydrants ourselves, but we might be able to do 50. We might be able to do 60.
Questions or comments from residents on this? Yes. The microphone is here, actually. And if you could please state your name and where you live.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Lynn. I live at 10 Cedar Hill Drive. I don't know why I'm coming back to my chair. It's a weird thing to do. So I love the suggestion and getting community involved, helping each other, and certainly safety is very important. But I like things that are free. So I was thinking, rather than kind of threatening to charge people money, on Westwood Day we could give away shovels that have a mark that say, I sound really nervous, sorry, I am a little nervous. When the snow gets up to here, shovel your hydrant. Like, there's just other ways, I think, of achieving the education. But I appreciate what you're trying to do. I just, I like free stuff, so.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Adamila Savlovich, Fabrizio, 32 Webster Street. I support Chief Deckers. I have oil heat in my home, and I'm a pain in the neck because I am constantly reminding my husband, please shovel a path to the oil fill-up tank. And I'm concerned about someone coming to give me oil. I'm more concerned that there's going to be a fire and the fire department can't get to the hydrant. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, Mike?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a clarification. The way this article is written, the A in the article already exists, so it says erase what is already there and add to it. B and C is what's being added, so the new language, when you focus on this, when you hear the vote, is for B and C.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think that wraps up that discussion. Thank you very much, Chief. Thank you. I think that brings us to the town salary and expense budgets. I think that would be you, Pam.
Great. So the next couple of articles are our standard budget articles each year. We just have a quick presentation, and you have that in front of you, if you can't see that screen. Okay, so our standard budget articles each year, the first couple that we do at town meeting are the ones that supplement the current year's budget and take care of any unpaid prior year bills. We then have our main operating budget article. We then have a series of capital budget articles, appropriating funds for school, municipal, and sewer capital items. And then we always have a couple of extra articles dealing with our reserves or liability accounts. So appropriations to our stabilization fund or to our OPEB accounts. We did at your last meeting go in depth through all of the budget that the selectmen had put forth, and there's not been any changes to the budget from what you've seen or what's in the printed budget documents. We always just like to remind everyone on this slide that we're trying to deal with a lot of areas in the budget. Not only our school and municipal budgets, which are most familiar to people, but our capital budget, our reserves, our liabilities, trying to balance all of those against our tax bills. I think the selectmen in the last couple of years have put forth budgets supported by the Finance and Warrant Commission, voted by town meeting, which are really doing a nice job of addressing this wide variety of areas that we need to with the town funding. So we won't go in detail on funding since we did such a long walkthrough at your last meeting, but that information is available online. That presentation and our budget summary books are on the town's website, which have all of that. We talked about the tax levy, we talked about University Station, how much money we're getting from that, how we're using that money. All of that is in that material.
Can I just interrupt for a second? You say there are no changes, but there's been a shift on the school budget because you've asked an amount to be switched over into that budget from the town budget for University Station costs?
No, we've not changed what we've been showing as an allocation for the school budget. Okay. The school in one of their first budget presentations was just showing the University Station as an offset amount.
Okay.
And we need to vote it, so they just clarified that number.
Okay, so
we
it's
didn't change the number.
It's not different.
Yep,
it's
not the
shifting.
same number we
Okay,
were showing in for everything for the school budget.
Marianne, can I just ask one question? Could you clarify for the record how we've done with University Station revenue, because there was a statement made today that it underperformed, which I think is basically totally incorrect. That has revenue exceeded our expectations?
The revenues exceeded the expectations of when the project was first presented. I don't have a slide to that on University Station, again, because we went through that in great detail, but it is online. But the project has brought in over $5 million in new annual revenue for the town, which is quite significant. We've used most of that money, a good piece of that, towards helping our school and municipal budgets, making sure that those are in good shape. We've also used some of the funds to offset any increased costs we have in town to service the project, particularly with our public safety departments. It's been a terrific source of revenue for the town, as well as really helping us shore up that commercial residential split.
I just want that clarified so we have the facts out there. The other thing, there were also funds were provided for us for additional capital needs like the Deerfield playing field, et cetera. So the town did receive substantial benefit from University Station from a purely fiscal perspective, yes?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I'll only add to that, George, and you'll see later on in Pam's presentation. Tonight you'll see over $400,000 from meals tax money, most of which is collected from University Station, for things like tennis courts at the high school, upgrades and modifications to the pool. So the revenue has been increased.
Thank you.
So just quickly, a couple of slides before we look at the actual articles, but this slide just summarizes the total revenue that we're budgeting for FY19. Our overall budget, $96 million. It's shown in the blue piece of the pie, 80% of that comes from our taxes. That's very standard for a municipality in Massachusetts to have that kind of revenue chart. Since we work under Proposition 2.5, it makes it a very difficult financing model. We run on taxes, we have restrictions with what we can do with our tax levy. We're always trying to balance how much we go back to our residents for additional taxes. So it's a difficult model to work with. We looked at your last meeting about the components of the full taxes. The more of that comes from commercial revenue, the more that helps our residential tax bill. But $96 million in total for FY19. On the proposed spending side, spending that $96 million, the largest piece of our spending is for our school and municipal operating budget, $65 million for those two budgets, or about 68%. So the most important area of our budget, this is where we provide that direct service to the community, our school budget, our public safety, police, fire, DPW budgets, and all of our staffing. It's the main area of what a town does, what any town does, is where we provide our core services and where we are spending the majority of our funds. Just looking at the actual articles, as I mentioned, the first one.
I had a question.
Oops, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'd like to interrupt you. I just can't believe I've never asked this question before, but how does our operating budget compare to the towns that we consider our peers that are a similar size?
Yep, we do include some of that in the in our budget summary book in the back. The Department of Revenue has some great areas on their website where we have to, every community has to kind of post lots of data, and it's very easy to go in and compare. And we're really pretty much right in line. Kind of the percent that we spend on our school budget as compared to other areas, really standard for communities that we would compare ourselves to.
And the 96 million?
Sorry?
And the total budget as well?
And the total budget, yep. We're really a pretty much standard suburban kind of high-performing community. Those are the communities we present ourselves with, and we line up quite well.
You're showing 6% state aid for 2019 budget. What has been the state aid contribution, say, for the last 5 years? Has it
As a
varied?
percent of budget?
Yes.
We've seen relatively little change with that. We really, don't get a significant amount of state aid. We get just over about $5 million, most of that coming from Chapter 70, the education aid. And then we have some municipal aid, about $700,000. In the current year, the governor had a 3% increase to the municipal aid category and a very minor increase to Chapter 70. I think just the $25 per pupil for the Chapter 70. So the 6% has really not fluctuated over the years. The good news is when the state has difficulty and they're cutting state aid, it kind of really doesn't affect us either, because it's really not a big component. And again, that's very standard for a community our size. If you looked at, Wellesley or Weston or Needham, other communities are gonna line up right like that. Large cities, very different. Lawrence, Springfield might be 50 or 60% of their budget is coming from state aid.
Thank you.
So just looking at the articles, when we do the full warrant, the first couple of articles supplement the current year, any cleanup that's needed to the FY18 budget. So we don't have those for you tonight. We'll be working on those more over the next month, and those would be done at your public hearing at the end of March. As well as the unpaid bills, we don't expect any, and I think the selectmen are going to pull that warrant article at their next meeting because we've really not, the last several years, had any unpaid bills to deal with at town meeting. So then our next budget would be our main operating budget for the town, $91 million operating budget for FY19. The bar chart shows you the components of that by category. Shown in blue, the school, $44.9 million, municipal budget in red, $20.6, our fixed cost budget, $14.7, debt service, $6.1. Again, that's really pretty standard distribution as it's been in prior years. We do, in our budget documents that you've been reviewing and in our budget summary book, we show the history of what the budget increases have been year to year for our school and municipal components. So we've talked a lot about how in the first couple of years when University Station came online, we were using some of that funding to supplement our school and municipal budget, and you see those in the left-hand of the table on the bottom, FY16 and 17, where we had some larger than normal increases to our budgets. And now in the last couple of years and proposed for FY19, we're returning more towards a 3% increase for school and municipal, which is more of our sustainable rate going forward. So that's what's being proposed for FY19. The schools a 3.4% increase, municipal 3.1%. Just one more slide on that operating budget. Again, $91 million budget, 3.8% overall, or $3.3 million increase over the prior year. And this table shows the individual components, what's happening with each of those as a change from year to year.
Pam, what's changed with fixed cost?
So the fixed cost budget encompasses all of the benefits and payroll taxes, et cetera, for all of our school and municipal employees, including our health care costs and our pension costs.
Was that what's driving the?
And that's what's driving that increase. And we have that, unfortunately, is about a similar increase to what we've had in the last couple of years' budgets. Our pension assessment, some of our payroll tax costs are trending higher than, you know, are trending high.
What's the biggest driver in your opinion? Is it healthcare or is it pension?
Right now, it's the pension. All Massachusetts pension systems are on a mandatory funding schedule. We're about halfway through a mandatory 30-year schedule to pay off an unfunded liability. So those systems have to set their assessments out to the communities at a rate to stay on compliance to meet mandatory funding. So our pension assessments the last couple of years have been in the 12 to 15% range, quite high. Healthcare has been a somewhat more manageable 4 to 6% increase over the last couple of years.
GIC just sent out information to the community that they're pushing to keep the healthcare costs this year down. I think that means that they're going to be shifting some part back on to co-pays and things like that.
Okay, so that's it on the operating budget, and I know your committee has been meeting with all of the departments and going through those, and I think reporting out next week on any updates. So the next couple of articles deal with our capital budget items. And as with prior years, we'll have an article for municipal capital, one for school, one for sewer, and one for other capital. We consider our main municipal and school budget capital articles our base capital articles that we commit to every year. The bar chart on the bottom shows what the selectmen have proposed for capital spending over the last several years. We have, the selectmen have tried to increase our capital spending each year. As shown in the green on the right, 1.7 million for the two main base school and municipal articles, more than double what we were doing in FY14. So there's been a continuing emphasis of the last several years on making sure we're funding our capital budgets as best we can. So the next couple of slides just go through those individual articles. The first is the municipal capital budget, $886,000 to fund the items as listed. This is a very standard list of items for equipment and projects for our municipal departments, primarily our public safety departments, police, fire, and DPW. So again, a pretty standard list of the items here. The selectmen are really committed to an annual reinvestment in our public safety equipment and our town building and assets. It is critical that our departments have up-to-date, safe, efficient equipment to perform their jobs. And we are on a very healthy rotation schedule with our police, fire, and DPW as far as annually looking at and continually rolling over our stock to make sure that it's all up to date.
Just want to make sure we don't have questions on the municipal capital items. I was just curious, Todd, on the plow trucks, is that a replacement of what you have? How many do you have?
Currently, right now, in inventory, with our one-ton vehicles, we have 15. With the heavy-duty dump trucks themselves, the bigger units that you see standing shelving, there is 11.
And when you have a big storm, they're all
Every one of them are out.
Yeah.
About, unfortunately.
Thank you. Any other questions on
Yeah.
municipal capital? Yeah, Mike and.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. The library self-check circulation terminals, is that to replace one, add one, upgrade one? What is that?
It's to actually upgrade the two self-checks that we have in the main library. So we have about 70% of our checkouts are done by the self-check, and if we're using self-checks. So these would add additional features and would be faster. Thank you.
Up here on the IT line item, end user technology, any way to describe that better?
So the town's IT department handles, I believe, is over 300 different, computers and printers and equipment out in all the departments. And the same thing, they have kind of an annual rotation where they'll go in and look and try to replace those on an ongoing basis, so that we're never kind of stuck with, everything's outdated and we have to replace it all. They're kind of always looking and rotating and upgrading. And all of our IT equipment is handled centrally by our IT director. Individual departments don't do their own purchasing or handling of that.
And the same thing on police vehicles, how many vehicles what percentage of the total vehicles are we turning over?
So we're on a rotation where we do 3 vehicles annually, again, so that we're never at a point where everything is kind of outdated all at once. They're kind of constantly rotating. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but we do have in the budget summary, we have kind of a listing of how many vehicles each department has, as well as the description of each of these projects. These guys know better than I.
Yeah, we usually see those schedules. The pool has a maintenance schedule, the fire department, the police, it's all listed out for years.
And the departments have really done a great job of trying to inventory their assets, make sure they're on a good rotation schedule. Probably 10 or 12 years ago, we were at a point where we would, have to replace everything at once in a department, or they'd have, all outdated equipment, and we're just trying to do much more of a routine rotation schedule. The selectmen have stressed that and have tried to fund capital items in that manner.
I think the school does the same, right, Barb?
Yes.
Listed out, yeah, similar exercise.
Like the roofing.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions or comments from residents on the municipal capital improvements? Not seeing any.
So the next article is the school capital budget article. $867,000 for the items listed here. And again, this is very standard, and the items listed here are standard. This is coming from the school department and the school committee, the items listed, but it's their regular, again, rotation and upgrade, making sure they're maintaining their buildings and equipment. Continual reinvestment.
Questions from FinCom, Jim?
Between these two, we have a little over 1.7 million in free cash. And the free cash was the money that came in after last year's budget. Is that correct? So what's the driving force behind that 1.7 million? Where's that coming from?
So free cash is something that's annually certified. So it's really, in a sense, our retained earnings. When we finish a fiscal year, the state certifies an amount for every community. In a sense, it's available retained earnings that can be appropriated at a subsequent town meeting. So every year we have a free cash certification. And again, that's a page we have in our summary book that will show you each year what our free cash has been. So it's really, for municipalities in Massachusetts, we budget to have revenues match expenses exactly. We have to be balanced in order to get our tax rate certified. When the year closes, there's always some expenditures unused, and there's always some revenue over budget. And the way the state certifies our tax rate, we're kind of forced to be conservative so that we can't, kind of overspend funds and push a deficit forward year to year. So every community in Massachusetts has some free cash. The state certifies it, and then you can budget and use it. So our amount that we have available to use for the FY19 budget is just over $5 million. We're using in total $2.1 million for capital, and we're using $100,000 for our stabilization article that you'll see coming up.
You know how much of it was money returned from over budgeting versus money that was uncollected, or revenue that was not accounted for?
Also a component is that we have a fiscal policy not to use the full amount certified. So some of the balance each year comes from that we didn't use the full amount from the previous year. So there's retained earnings sitting there before we start to add in the revenue and before we start to add in the expenditures. A good portion of ours the last couple of years is coming on the revenue side. We've talked when we've looked at the budget, we've had strong receipts for motor vehicle excise. We've had strong building permit activities. And instead of kind of increasing our expected budget for that and spending it, we keep the budget conservative and steady. We let the additional revenue come in. And once it's in free cash, we're then appropriating it. And we have financial policies on what we use free cash for. We never apply it to the operating budget. We use it for capital, one-time needs, that type of thing. Okay, so the school article, kind of the standard projects that they would have. And the next capital article is the sewer budget capital article. We show this separately because it is funded with sewer user fees or sewer retained earnings. We operate the sewer department on an enterprise fund, fully having that revenue offset that cost. So this is a list of projects as put forth by the sewer commissioners. And again, it's pretty standard, making sure their equipment is up to date, and more importantly, making sure that they're continually inspecting and repairing the sewer lines throughout town. And then we have our next article, kind of our other capital article. The last several years, the selectmen have tried to put forth in the budget beyond our base capital. So we have our base every year, school and municipal, and we've tried to increase that what we can. We've also said, let's look at doing projects above that. Sometimes things come up, or community-wide projects that really would be hard to fit within those base capital articles, and we handle them in an additional article. So this year we have additional capital on the top, $857,000 for the projects listed here. $50,000 for a town hall reconfiguration. A lot of you know we have an office in the basement of Town Hall. It's really not appropriate working space, and would like to, now that the selectmen have relocated out of the selectmen's meeting room at Town Hall and have their meetings in the police station, the new police station has a beautiful meeting room, and so the selectmen have been meeting there. It's going to give us that space in Town Hall to do a little bit of reconfiguration and get that one department up out of the basement. The second item, $175,000. The school has identified some repair work needed for an elevator that's currently at the Thurston Middle School. $100,000 for design funds for a Board of Selectmen DPW project to work on the traffic signaling on High Street. The state has a program that we can get some funds to help us with that, and we need to appropriate some design funds in order to qualify for the state money, which I believe is $400,000 or $500,000. 500,000?
It could be closer to 6.
Is this right in the center of town?
It's all
Or-
along High Street.
All the way to Summer?
Yeah, it involves, like Mike said, the traffic signals from essentially Bowerbrook all the way up through Hartford and High. And the technology is called adaptive traffic signalization. And we met with Mass DOT District 6 months ago just to present the notion that Town of Westwood is very interested in pursuing this from a grant opportunity perspective. And the state was very receptive. So this initial investment, similar to how we've approached the Complete Streets program, it's a significant return. I'm pretty confident that we'll get them to fund the construction phase of this, though. It's $100,000 for design, of which I've spoken with him a couple of times regarding. It actually might end up being a little bit less as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year.
And Todd, what kind of improvements do you think we could hope to see from this?
I think there's always been inquiries of how we can improve traffic flow along Route 109. Are we ever going to eliminate traffic along 109? No. Are we ever going to eliminate the cut-through traffic through the traffic calming neighborhoods? No. But I think this would probably achieve a better balance. This is better.
But Todd, I think I want like specifics, like it would detect when there's no vehicles, so we wouldn't waste time on a green light,
It would
like
detect- Exactly, so if you're.
smart technology to actually detect motion.
So in other words, if there are no vehicles sitting at the Gay Street Route 109 intersection, it would automatically refresh itself to let the other signals know that there isn't a need or necessity to have that green light green at that point in time. So there's only one other area in the state right now that's pursuing this. It's a seaport district in Boston. So they're pretty jammed down there. I think this would fall in line.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, another item on this list, $100,000 for the affordable housing property in town to help do some necessary maintenance to some of those, some of that housing stock. And then two items, $125,000 for a major repair and upgrade to the HVAC dehumidification system at the pool at the high school, and $307,000 for high school tennis courts and lighting project. And as John mentioned, those last two items, $432,000, we're proposing to fund from the meals tax revenue. Those are really, significant community-wide projects that need to go forward. It would be hard for us to fit those again within our ongoing capital budgets, but utilizing some of the meals tax revenue would allow that to go forward at this point.
Great, Barb?
Is it now is that a one-off, or is it now a policy on what to do with the meals tax? Because I know long-range planning has been discussing the meals tax for quite a while, and how to fund, like, capital stabilization fund or various other things. So is that just how we're dealing with it now? And this is not necessarily the policy going forward, or?
Yes, I think, people felt we needed to start to make some use of that money. That came at a time that these two projects were going forward. So this would be a way to allow us to get that done. We do hope to see, kind of after the final restaurant opens, I think this week in University Station. Once that gets up and running, we're going to be able to see our kind of updated, stabilized number for meals tax revenue. Right now, it's at about $400,000 a year, which has been terrific and additional revenue from University Station. But with that one more restaurant coming online, we'll get to see what that is. So we are proposing to use fund the meals tax for these two items. With what we expect to take in from the state through the end of the year, we would have at the end of the fiscal year, after this appropriation, about $630,000 in the meals tax account.
But it is, I mean, it is to be determined as to how we figure,
Okay.
expend that going forward. One of the things Pam and I are talking about is taking a small percentage of the meals tax and applying it to the aid to the elderly.
Right.
Is there those types of funding sources that we can come up with? We don't ever want it to contribute to the operating budgets. We don't want to become reliant, but there's got to be certain things we can give direct aid to the residents to really feel the help from this revenue.
Any other questions from FinCom on the other capital improvements? Or questions or comments from residents? Yes, ma'am. Not sure where the microphone went. Oh, Todd has it.
Drop the mic. We had a mic.
You're on fire today. I just want to go back to a planning board member and a board of selectmen member that saying that I'm saying untruths about University Station. I think that is subjective because I'm looking at the budget and I can't get a definitive answer. I'm hoping that Pam can tell me. A definitive answer on what is our net fiscal revenue on an annual basis from University Station. I see things in the budget, sorry. I see things, excuse me, that will say above Proposition 2.5, 179,000. I would just like to have some kind of an idea on what our annual intake on University Station has been and what it is. I'm not a financial person. I can't read accounting statements, so I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
Thanks.
We do have in our budget summary book, which is on our website, we have, you know, kind of 2 to 3 pages that summarize all of our University Station activity. We try to make it easy to walk through. It looks at how has the revenue come in and how have we applied that to the budget. But we right now, we have an additional annual $5 million in revenue from the University Station projects. But you know, I could send those couple of pages out to you.
No, I appreciate it.
We only are not talking about it tonight because we did do that at the last FinCom meeting in quite some detail. They're all nodding their head. We spent a lot of time looking at it. But it is on our website, or I could email it to you directly. But we want people to know exactly how much has come in from University Station and how have we used that money in the budget process.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Anything else on these capital items, Mike?
I'd just add that when we did the fiscal report on University Station, we estimated there'd be $5 million in additional net gross revenue. We've achieved that. There'd be an additional $3 million net revenue. We've achieved that. And we still have developable land available in University Station. There's a project going forward, the condominiums. There's some more office and retail in the front of where the condominiums are going to go. And on a plateau, there's 3 pads for office development. And those, when they come online, will be net additions to revenue that we did not predict. We were conservative in the prediction for the revenue from University Station, and we will have exceeded that by the time it gets built up. Maybe some years because the offices aren't jumping into development, but we eventually will achieve it.
Yeah, Howard.
Quick point, and that $5 million does not include the meals tax?
Does not include
So-
that.
So on top of that, you
On
got.
top of that.
And,
Yeah,
The
the other
increase in
thing that goes unspoken, that I don't even think we fully realize, the adjacent properties have sold for much more than they were assessed a few years ago. And the full expectation is that the other 100 acres in University Station that wasn't comprised in the 140,000 that was University Station will in fact someday achieve, you know, new growth as well, because people aren't paying those monies without an idea that they will develop them into something better than exists today.
I think we can move on to the other capital.
The other capital is just,
capital
the other is
improvements.
just the ambulance. We're showing that separately because that's a direct revenue source that can only be used for ambulance-related costs. So a couple of items there that we would always have, and then this year to replace the ambulance. So we only have that once every 4 or 5 years, but to replace the ambulance for $360,000. Okay, so that's the capital, and then just quickly, our stabilization fund, just our annual transfer of $100,000 from free cash to the stabilization, just to keep us on target. We're in really good shape with that. Currently have $3 million in the account, puts us right near where our target needs to be. Super important component of our AAA rating. And then finally, the appropriation to the OPEB liability trust. We have included in the budget $1.4 million for this year's annual appropriation. That bar chart shows you what the appropriation has been every year. And clearly you can see by the chart we've made tremendous progress on that, and the FinCom's well aware of all the work with that and how we've been funding that, but we are really in very good shape with that OPEB liability. So as shown in the green, $1,415,000 would be the appropriation for FY19.
Questions from FinCom? Any questions or comments from residents?
I had one question.
I'm sorry, I missed you, Rob.
Just on OPEB, I don't want to leave that too quickly. But have we received a new actuarial assessment? It should be due any day, right?
Yeah, I know we keep saying that. I honestly, I think like there's so much work for them now because everybody has the OPEB. So the Siegel company that you've met before is the actuarial firm is doing the update. They have all of our data. They're kind of going through that. I do expect that we'd have that sometime in March.
Okay. So either way, whatever the report would say, if it were to suggest a larger liability, this is something we would probably deal with next.
In the future year.
Not
Yep.
this year. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So the appropriations that we're making in 19 as in 18 kind of worked up the last study and the suggested increases that we needed each year. We would then see what the new study does and kind of start with the FY20 budget addressing what that is.
Right. Okay. Thanks, ma'am.
Any questions or comments from residents? Okay, and I think Chairman Hickey, you're going to update us on what's to come at our next hearing.
So there are, again, as Pam said, the unpaid prior bills and any supplemental appropriations would be at the 26th, as well as there are discussions between the town and the developer of Islington regarding the potential disposition of property or a land development agreement. And so we're just not prepared to discuss those tonight. The abandonment of portions of Hedgerow Lane, there is, again, ongoing discussions. We think we're close, and we think that there will be a warrant article for Hedgerow Lane. And lastly, we recently have advanced this notion of having an appropriation for a study of municipal buildings and overall safety and what we could be doing better while we continue to own a number of properties. At some point we will be building a new school, we will use new technology, but we continue to run 8 elementary schools and a large number of municipal properties. And so we thought it would be healthy to have someone take a look at that and see what enhancements we could offer. Anything else on that, Mike?
Well, I'll just add that since the article was proposed last week, we've identified 3 firms to come in and speak with us. The purpose of the conversations with those firms is, or specialize in this sort of a security, is to get sort of a better scope of services we might expect. School department's going to participate with municipal government to take a look at this, and then to get some estimate of what we should be appropriating for this study and you know, some equipping of safety equipment, so we can make sure that we're as safe as possible.
And lastly, the affordable housing appropriation. This really has to do with our subsidized housing inventory and what has changed over time as to what is housing stock and how do you measure housing stock. And so we've worked quite a bit with the developers of University Station to secure some appropriation money. The town currently is in possession of about $500,000, $489,000 that by right should be returned to the developers. We've gotten to a point where we can keep that money, and we want to use that money to, again, increase some of our subsidized housing inventory. And it gets a little bit technical with some of the changes that have occurred around the measurement of long-term housing units. So we have Epic by Bridges down there. When that was built, that was not statewide. That was not a contributor to your housing stock. It now is. So we've worked quite a bit with the developer to mitigate that. So we'll have a lot of detail around that for you. That hasn't been noticed to the public yet, so I think we're better off giving you more detail on the 26th.
Any, Jim?
On the last one there, on the affordable housing, the $800,000, is that earmarked for anything or specifically just for?
The 480, well, there's 489.
488,000?
There's 489,000 today in unused building permit fees.
From universities?
From phase one, that should be returned. We've come to a point where we can keep it with your approval and town meeting's vote, obviously. And we've come up with some other funding sources to get us to $1 million to mitigate the need for additional subsidized housing units.
So is the town looking to purchase property?
We own some properties that we can rehabilitate.
We own some properties that need a rehab and are not on our subsidized housing inventory. And we're exploring a couple of other options to get, you know, another 4 units. And we think that the package should be somewhere around $1 million, so that's what the Board of Selectmen is.
And they'll be maintained solely as
It
affordable
will be
housing
all,
projects?
it will be monies dedicated to affordable housing. That's the, as was indicated, this is part of the University Station project. There's 64 beds that were created in the Bridges facility. We are now of an understanding that the state didn't before, but are now going to count those at the 2020 census as part of the housing stock, meaning that generates another 10% or 7 units that need to be created of affordable housing to offset those beds. And so we're looking to create 7 units.
Counting it towards the housing stock, but not towards affordable housing.
That was done created at the time.
An affordable housing component, yeah.
So when something's built today, obviously, 10% of it is affordable, right? So you always keep pace with the demand. But something was built along the way where there was no earmark because there wasn't a requirement at the time.
So this housing, is it going to be turned over to the housing authority in town?
No, we're exploring different options of how to create that. I don't want to get into detail, but there is one particular option that we're exploring, and it looks like it'll bear fruition, and we can explain it later, but.
But some would be Waha. I mean, some of it.
The 3 units that exist today currently exist with the Housing Authority or Waha. It's not-for-profit arm of the Housing Authority, which owns the property.
Is there going to be some mechanism so that we ensure that there's sufficient money to maintain those properties? You know, like, I know we've got, what, $100,000 that we're putting in, so we'll maintain them?
Yeah, we'll get into detail later, but the concept is to make sure that doesn't become a liability.
That doesn't happen again? And maybe clean up the finances of Waha through mortgages or whatever they've got, you know?
Well,
I don't know,
think we
it's gonna
I
work
think all
with them.
this can assist them in coming to some
Right.
stability, yeah. I mean, you know, these things were, these houses were donated, so the Burgrade's interest. These houses were donated, which is wonderful, wonderful, but they were donated as-is conditions, and as-is conditions on donated properties isn't always what you, it's like the car that you turn in for kids and things like that. They need quite a bit of repair to get it to be in good working order, and that's what we got.
But what I will say, and I think when we present it more fully on the 26th, it's a very creative solution to a problem that we have.
Do you have any sense as to when we're going to see final language on the Islington Center redevelopment?
We're working on it. We're hoping that you'll start seeing language by the middle of the month, at least some drafts.
As you probably know, we have our next meeting after we conclude this hearing, which may be tonight. We then meet on March 13th. We have our subcommittee reports. I mean, if folks think it would be helpful, I know there's a lot to do that night, but if there is an update, it might be worthwhile. Do people agree that it would be nice to hear an update that night if there is one? I think if there is one.
Well, the planning board is next meeting
Oh.
on March 13th, so that's when they'll take the project up
I
again.
see.
So it would be after March 13th.
Okay.
Can we make sure when we get any language that each subsequent amendment is marked so we can see the changes?
Yeah, that would be helpful, and obviously just getting us what you can in writing as soon as possible, and keeping in mind, and just for the record, that the March 26th hearing that we have, public hearing, will be our first and only time where we'll be vetting this. So we do hope that members of the community will come out so that we can hear from folks in terms of what their thoughts are on that. So we hope people will know that although that will be our second set of hearings, it will be our first on that issue.
And then the Islington Center Task Force meets on the 14th.
Okay.
And our hearings are open, and that's the meeting at which, after we, I think we've heard from the developer, when we'll be voting on what our recommendations are.
So great opportunity for folks to attend that as well.
In the past, like University Station, that's what you did. You identified a few folks to go to those various meetings from the FinCon, so you got an idea of what was going on in real time as it was progressing. And we would encourage you to do that. There's Board of Selectmen meetings, there's Planning Board meetings, there's Task Force meetings.
George has been monitoring on Islington from the very beginning, that task force. So, okay.
And we're supposed to be vetting this, you know, as we don't have any information, the general public doesn't have the information. So we're asking them to play catch up and open up to public debate on an extremely short period. I mean, I'm not sure that we're doing the town justice if we're scrambling to fit everything into a short time frame.
Well, that's why we've discussed this, we always have the option to vote indefinite postponement if we feel that we can't make a decision with the information available in the time that we have, and I think that's something we'll have to assess.
I'm not concerned, I mean, I think, are getting more information, but the general townsfolk aren't getting the same information, and we're not giving them the opportunity to.
But
I
don't, nothing that we'll be presenting, though, this has been going on for years, this discussion. I can't imagine that anybody's going to be surprised by what they're seeing.
That's the point, it's going on for years, and here we still don't even have proposals.
But you have a lot of public meetings.
Right.
The planning board heavily attended, the task force, I wish we would get more there, but there's been a lot of public meetings on it. I think the challenge is, and Mary Ann raised an interesting issue, it may be useful on these very critical issues to have FinCom members attend some of the, probably especially the planning board meetings. I mean, those are where I think the most detail, most discussion comes out. The Islington Center Task Force is taking, probably trying to take a more global view in terms of development in Islington and development now on even on High Street, but as a subset, it will look at and try and make a recommendation on it. But I'll tell you, the thing to, you know, I think some of the public hearing for the planning board easily must have had 100 people there at the, was it last week? And I just find if you can get the time, that's where these things are really being vetted. And I think it's a struggle for the FinCom because everybody's busy, but it's like, you know, those are fairly intense meetings and presentations, and there is a lot of public feedback in those sessions.
And it's all on tape, yeah, all online, and it has been a progressively changing process whereby a lot of listening has gone on and modifications have been made to try and address the issues that, that the committees have confronted or that they've heard from the public. And so there's a lot of effort that's going to.
That's a different, all that's not the point, though. The point is that we're going to be asked to give our recommendation on words that are written in a warrant article that we're going to see maybe that day. So that's what we're saying we'd like to not see it that day. Because if we do, we're not going to have time to consider that warrant article. Forget all the context. We've all been listening. We've been going to these meetings and we've been listening. So the question is that article.
Yeah, and we'll get that to you as early as we can. I mean, what we're saying is we can't get it to you before, by your next meeting to come and present it. But if we can get it to you individually to be distributed, we'll get it to you.
We obviously can't deliberate outside of our meetings, but it would be nice to be able to digest it and have time to think about questions and what we'd like to discuss together and at our hearing. So that would be very helpful.
It might be just a suggestion, if you want to hold a special meeting just before you hold the next hearing, to just work on, to just look at that and have that explained to you. We'll try and accommodate.
Yeah, let me.
At this point, we can't notice another meeting.
I don't think that we can.
Marion, because there's two components. I think Mike's raising a very interesting issue here. One is, what is the project that's being proposed in terms of what's supposed to take place in Islington? But probably the more complicated part of it is, what's the relationship between the town and the developer? Because that's where, you know, there's negotiations between the selectmen and the developer in terms of, can they reach an agreement on what they want to take forward? So there's really two components to it. And so I'm wondering, Mary Ann, I guess, Mike, when do you think the earliest that something could go to the FinCom? It's also going to be hard to understand that, Mary Ann, just my guess is without having some interaction.
Sometime just after the 14th.
I think what we should do now is we need to move on. We've got the planning board here. They've been very patient, and they've got 3 articles. So I think we need to move on so we can get to those folks. And then maybe we can talk for a few minutes if we have energy.
Well, part of what they're going to talk is exactly is this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the question is whether we feel we can fit in another meeting between the 13th and the 26th is what we're talking about, right? So I think we should not hold up all these other folks. Let's put that aside for a moment, but you'll be in touch with us and send us the language as soon as you've got it, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
To all of you, thank you. And with that, we'll call forward the planning board. You have 3 articles. Abby McCabe, town planner, the real Trevor Lovenstein.
Is standing up, yes.
Go on, you
Have to coordinate our outfits more carefully so we don't have the same colors on.
And you've got that microphone right in front of you, that green.
Thanks.
Pull that up, we'll hear you.
Yep.
So you have 3 articles before us.
Just
Okay, can everyone hear okay? So essentially, the first article that's before you is the zoning map amendment related to Islington Center. The proposal is to expand the boundary of the local business district, that's the base zoning or the underlying zoning, as well as the FMUOD 6, the flexible multiple use overlay district, to the 9 School Street and 277A Washington Street properties. On the slide, the picture on the left is the existing zoning. If I could just see. Oh, that doesn't work. Mike, are you able to just point to the 2 parcels? The 2 parcels right now, yep, that's the 277 Washington Street. There's currently a residential property on that. And then the 9 School Street on the left, it's blue, residential. And the proposal is to expand that to the FMUOD boundary. Essentially, this proposal is making all the properties within the Islington Center special permit project that's currently before the planning board within the flexible multiple use overlay in the business zoning district. The picture on the left shows an aerial view of the properties that we're talking about. Those green dotted lines, that's the FMUOD where it exists today on the left. And those two properties, the one that's tucked behind, there's no frontage on that, the Washington Street property. And then that 9 School Street property that currently has the old tailor shop building, and then it kind of juts out to the back, and that's undeveloped land where there's some trees there. So that is currently zoned residential. It's been zoned that way. The planning board had a public hearing last week on February 27th and voted to recommend these articles, or this article forward for the map change to expand that boundary to include those parcels. And then the image on your right, that includes the area of the project that's currently under review for Islington Center. It's, as you just heard, the Board of Selectmen are currently negotiating the land disposition agreement, and the Planning Board has an open public hearing on the special permit that opened in January, has continued into February, and is continued to their meeting next week on the 13th. But that image on your right, that pink line, that's the existing zoning line. And the way the project's proposed right now, that the building on the corner of 9 School Street, that's the proposed CVS building, is kind of straddling that zoning line. And then there's also some landscape buffer area in the back part of that 9 School Street lot, and some parking that is to service the municipal uses, the library, youth and family services, as well as the retail businesses.
So Abby, is this rendering, is this the 2 peaks, is that piece facing Washington Street or School Street in this picture on 3? Where is this facing? I assume it's Washington Street.
That would be
but
facing
it's saying
Washington.
it's facing
Yeah, that
School
would be
Street.
facing Washington Street. You're
Yep.
correct, the 2 peaks.
Right, and so in the, sorry, this is the next slide. Oh, I was gonna get to that when we talked about the next article, but this is the CVS that's proposed. If you're looking on Washington Street, essentially where that Cafe Diva building is now, because you can see the Wild Blossom blue awnings in the background on the left there. So that's that corner of School Street, and then the new 3-story building behind that.
Do you have any views from School Street?
No, no.
No, we haven't.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, we haven't actually been provided, the applicant for the project hasn't actually provided many views from that angle. They've been focused on they have dozens of these things, but not that one.
Well, I think that would be interesting, because I
Yeah.
think that's part of what people want to see, quite frankly, on what's a quiet road that has a lot of kids and traffic.
Well, yeah, we do have some elevations of that. I
That's
just
true,
don't have
yeah.
it in the presentation, but
helpful
we
as we
can
move
get you
forward.
that for.
I think it's all on their website too now.
Yes, we do have all the plans and material that's been submitted on our website, but we can incorporate that into the continued hearing on the 26th if we need to, or I can get that to
Is
Jane
it out
tomorrow.
though on your?
Yes, on the planning board's webpage, you have current applications where they have links to each meeting, each hearing that they've had.
That's specific, the School Street view you could send to me and I can send out to
Yes, yep.
That would be great.
Out of curiosity, it looks like it's 2 stories, but is that like a faux second story, or is that storage?
Yes, it's one story.
It's just,
Um,
oh, okay.
So we'll get into that a little bit more in the next article on the size, I think, but.
You refer to open space area landscape buffer. Is that the wetlands?
Yes, there is, at the back of that 9 School Street property. It doesn't really work on this screen, yes. So right now, that's currently a wooded area, and that's owned by, privately owned, it's owned by Petruzziello. As part of the project, it's proposed to be turned over to the town, that back portion, to remain as a buffer area.
The conservation,
There are some wetlands up there, so I know that's, the applicant is working on a filing with the Conservation Commission as well.
there's a buffer zone required with that, is all that met?
It's not, it's 20 feet from the residential zone, so that, I mean, that's more than 20 feet of the buffer there, and that portion, but.
Yeah, we haven't seen the plan, so I don't know, is it included, the buffer zone? I mean, this here doesn't show the buffer zone, but on the developer's plans, right, you must have a buffer zone?
Are you talking about a buffer against the wetlands or a buffer against the
Oh,
adjacent
yes.
properties?
Against the buffer, the wetlands.
Right, they do have that, it's just not displayed on this plan. We've seen it on some of the site plans they've submitted and the ones that they're working on for the conservation filing.
Would you like those to be sent,
Sure.
Jim? Could we get those as well, Abby? Had you finished on this one, Abby?
Yes, do we have anything else to add on that?
No, I mean, I think it's, I hope it seems pretty straightforward. We're just trying to capture, the intent here is to capture the potential project. Again, this is nothing that's set in stone here. We're just trying to lay the groundwork should the project be approved to make the zoning make sense effectively. And given that one of the properties is already basically commercially used and has historically been, so it sort of has a certain amount of logic anyway, but that is the intent.
On that note, in your note here, you said you identified specific design items that you wish to see improved. What were those specific design items?
Right, so the planning board, their hearing is still open.
Do you have a few hours? No.
They've had 3 hearings, and their hearing will continue into next week. They've asked some questions related to design of the buildings, especially with the building across the street, the new mixed-use building on the East Street corner, some landscaping details. They've asked for some traffic signal timing changes that are being looked at, sidewalk changes. At the hearing last week, the planning board gave direction on a couple items, specifically the Blue Heart Tavern and where that they wanted to see that located. So that was, they provided clear input to the applicant last week, so they're working on completing the design work and updating the parking requirements after the feedback they received at the hearing in the last week. So they have, sorry, so they haven't voted yet, but the planning board gave their initial support and stated that they requested information that they would consider to review and were initially inclined to support it if they can fully review the revised plans when it comes before them at upcoming hearings.
We've heard that this intersection rates an F at the state, failing grade. Are there any plans, since the developer's going to have 2 of the 4 corners and basically a clean slate, are there any plans to improve traffic flow, since theoretically we'll be getting improved traffic flow?
I can take a crack at that one, yeah. So we asked the developer's engineering team to look at however many options they thought were really available in terms of manipulating the intersection. Something we talked about quite a bit in the Islington Center task force meetings within the past couple of years was, you know, if we're going to rebuild these buildings, there's an opportunity there to maybe widen the intersection, change the radii on the corners, et cetera. Like that has to improve things, correct? And a lot of what the engineering has proven that none of those things really help the main problem, which is the congestion and the amount of what am I looking for? Volume, I guess, at the intersection. I'm trying to paraphrase. There's lots of sort of nitty-gritty things here. So the moves that made the biggest difference were adding lanes and making things wider and wider. And the planning board took that, and granted, those moves only brought us from, let's say, an F- to an F. It wasn't like a dramatic change kind of thing. So the planning board discussed this in the context of, well, the main criticism of the project is loss of village character, and we felt that widening the road, making it more like a highway, adding multiple lanes perhaps in each direction would really cuts against that concept. And the thought was that perhaps with some signal timing, there might be some minor improvements to alleviate some of the things that are more perceptible in terms of safety and convenience, but not necessarily the most impact in terms of overall improvement. So we sort of led the developer to say, go in that direction, keep it kind of simple what you're going to do as part of the project, to preserve the village character. Now, the other part of that is that, and this is one of the issues that both the planning board and the selectmen are grappling with, is there's only so much funding in this project to do certain things. And we also put a certain light on it that said, if widening the roadways is going to take away from being able to do things like improve the library, do community space, add open space, then we don't really want that either. We'd rather you focus your efforts on those pieces that are more impactful for the project. Does that kind of make sense? A long-winded answer?
It does, but I mean, it doesn't sound like, you know, we're getting better. I mean, you could have more, like you said, more volume.
Yeah.
In the same intersection, so does it just become worse for the people that are doing that?
Well, I think the dominant amount of information that came out of the engineering is that the volume problems are not caused by the people who are living in the centers. It's mostly traffic coming from other regions, other parts of the state, frankly, other parts of New England coming through at rush hours. So the impact what has been demonstrated to us is that the impact of the actual added parking and added residents in that area is fairly minor compared to what's already in place and coming into that center. So these adjustments might have only made very, very minor improvements, and we just didn't think as a board that they were really worth being part of the project necessarily as a sort of as a make or break kind of component. So.
You said added parking. Are we going to keep the same parking number of parking spaces? How's that going to work?
Total, that's something the planning board talked about a little bit at the last meeting and want to know more about it, the continued hearing, the exact parking number, but essentially what we saw at the last meeting was they were improving the overall number of parking spaces from what's there today. I mean, the project across the street, the mixed-use building, has an underground parking garage proposed. And then the 32 parking spaces in the municipal lot are recreated here on the School Street side.
I mean, just to add to the volume issue, you know, between April and July with Little League over there, it's going to create a problem one way or another.
Yeah, that's something that has actually come up in a couple of meetings as sort of like the kind of question, well, what about the Little League field? And that's a current problem, and that problem will probably continue to exist at a certain level, and there will probably continue to need to be some, you know, quote-unquote shared parking when that field gets very, very busy, and the parking spaces that are going to still exist behind the rebuilt Islington Community Center building. So a lot of that parking that you know now behind CVS and behind ICC will effectively be recreated just in a different configuration, because that parking is still needed for the whole project. But I don't think there's a solve for the Little League issue, and I think the project understands that, and it really can't solve it. I mean, there's no,
It's not looking to solve problems, just not
create more, yeah.
I mean, if we're not going to make them better, let's not make them worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think the good news is that for the residential component, which I think is getting the most focus in terms of parking, like additive parking, that's being entirely encompassed in the underground garage beneath the new building. So those spaces for those condominiums will be completely contained in an area now, which is basically not parked. It's all built, you know, it's all been built on and will be built on in the new proposed project as well. Sure.
Any other questions from FinCom on the zoning map amendment? Questions or comments from residents on this article? Yes, ma'am. Could you please just state your name and where you live? And there is a microphone somewhere. I don't know where it is. Oh, thank you.
Widening of the intersection, they were going to have to spend money on that, so they weren't going to be able to take care of Sharon with the pipe when they took over down there. They somebody could help me visualize what a 15,000 square foot CVS looks like. Is that like Dedham? You know, and it's, and my feeling is we're a village, we're small, we're quaint, and you create this big building, and again, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know what 15,000 square feet looks like, but from the picture and in comparison to the other corner of School Street that you just showed, it looks much larger. And I'm really concerned about that, being the focus of a village.
Yeah, the
And,
question, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So I guess the two questions are, is the tavern, you had mentioned that, and then maybe I'm jumping ahead in terms of the square footage.
And I just wanted to add, somebody, a meeting or two ago had raised the question of how does this compare to the one in Dedham by Legacy? So maybe if you're able to.
Compared to Walgreens here. I
Oh,
asked
okay.
the question.
No, don't be sorry. The question had been raised. I don't know if it had been answered, so maybe that could be
Yeah, yeah.
stepping off.
Okay.
place.
First, we will respond to the Blue
Tavern,
Heart
yeah.
Tavern one. On the site plan that's up on the screen on the right there, the planning board at the last hearing talked in length about the Blue Heart Tavern. They said if, you know, they would like to see the project go forward with the Blue Heart Tavern restored, and if so, they'd like to see it out on the front. It's in that corner there, so CVS is proposed on the corner, then the Wentworth Hall, library relocated across the street with an addition behind it for community space, and then right on Washington Street, kind of where the municipal lot is today. I don't know if
Maybe
someone
I'll
could
just go there
point
and to
to that.
gesture, maybe, yeah,
Okay.
Dave, could you like gesture to what these things are? Because it's a, strong is really not meant to do this.
That's the Blue Heart Tavern.
Nope.
Green Street.
Yep.
Library, addition, community center.
So essentially, though, the planning board, they said they would like to see the Blue Heart Tavern restored, but they would not require it if it was not, if it could not be achieved with this project economically and financially as they move forward. If it can't be achieved, that the planning board would not require the property owner, Petruzziello, to restore it, but they wanted to keep it on the plan in case that does come to fruition. And then, should we go into the next article, is talking about the size of the retail sales, a little bit more about the CVS building.
So
Yeah,
that would
might
flow
get
more
us there,
naturally.
yeah.
Okay, ma'am, we're going to answer your question as part of the second article, but before we move to that one, just wanted to make sure, any other questions or comments on this map amendment? Yes, ma'am. You just state your name and where you live, please.
Jennifer Ferraro, 130 Phillips Brooks Road. Could you just point where they would be parking for the Little League?
So
Currently, there's 29 spots that they use at the library. So you're showing the lot that's not where they park. So where would they park?
This would replace the municipal lot. There's parking over here, which you have to cross jaywalk to get to. And there's the spaces that are in front of Little League Park.
Right. So one of the spaces in the front we know are never sufficient enough, but so they always go across the street to the library where there's 29. So we're able to park. There's going to be public parking over there?
On this side of the street, on the School Street side, that's where there'll be municipal parking and some shared parking. And then across the street, that's the proposed for the mixed-use building. In the retail building is, it would propose to be parking for those retail uses that are there. So the parking would be there, it would remain, but it's not specifically for the Little League. I mean, it's.
So if Little League was to park there, what would happen? Let's face it, they're going to cross, these kids are going to expect to park where they currently are parking. You're not going to have these kids walking down Washington Street, crossing over Washington Street, or School Street, then crossing again over Washington Street to get to the ball field. So where would all these families, 40 to 50 cars, probably in a game, where are they going to park? They currently use all of the library. Where are these people going to park?
So to answer what I think was your first question was, I don't, and we'll be sure to bring this up at our next meeting with the developer, but I don't think the developer intends to restrict the Little League parkers from his lot if there are spots available. And
Can we get that in writing?
I don't know.
I mean, can we basically say, I mean, there's like 29 spots.
That's fair, and I think, but I don't know that this position, how that lot is actually appropriate now. Is that lot declared to be, I'm sort of asking you, but,
The
permitted?
ICC lot is in the library lot. No, sorry. The parking is currently mostly on the library's lot, which is the town's lot, and then there is parking at CVS. So people are today parking in the CVS parking lot, which is intended to serve the patrons of the CVS building, but people park there today.
I wanted to,
Go ahead.
so those are that's the municipal lot and everything. And I asked some questions. Oh, this is good. I've submitted some questions to pass along both to the town and the developer. Could there be other options out there? And I understand that some people, although it's not owned by the town, some people park in the Roach Brothers lot and walk through the back there. There's also an industrial area off of Wilson Way that's right now behind a wooded area that I think potentially if the owner of that property were willing to do this, there could be a path that would lead back there. That would open up additional space. And I looked at it'd be a 900-foot walk to get from there all the way around under the bridge to the field. But there are some other ideas that I think we should pursue in terms of off-site parking. Again, the town doesn't own that, doesn't control that, but if you could arrange for parking, if Roach Brothers is willing to, if they have room, if they're willing to let people do that, that's also the property on Wilson Way. In both cases, you wouldn't have to cross the street. It's definitely not as convenient as the CVS lot. That's like a 100-foot walk across a busy street. But I think these are some of the issues that we need to look at. It's also, the problem isn't caused by development necessarily, but it's an existing problem that we should try to find a way to address with this.
And to your point, for those of us who do youth sports, we're used to walking football fields and across lacrosse fields, when you get to some of these huge parks. So, taking a walk of that kind is really not out of the norm to go to a children's sporting event. But not to get too far off topic. Julie, you had a question.
Well, I would just add on to that. I would like to see us think about beyond just baseball. There's School Street parking, there's softball games there, so the public in general, and I'd encourage it to be safe. I mean, I come through East Street, and there are kids crossing, not at crosswalks. There's a lot there, so it would be helpful to have kind of traffic patterns, marked places for pedestrians to cross School Street, wherever in this development, because it's happened haphazardly today between Islington commuters. There's people bobbing and weaving everywhere. But my original question was, for your first article, if this doesn't get approved, what does it mean to the overall project?
Yeah, I think all these articles have to be approved together. If any of them fails, then the project can't go forward.
However, the planning board did recommend bringing this zoning article forward today, even though they haven't finalized the special permit for Islington yet. If they do approve the special permit for Islington that's before them, it would be subject to the zoning amendments. But also, I know Steve's been on the board for a while, but the board in the past has talked about extending the commercial zone for that 9 School Street property. There's currently, or most previously, it was the tailor shop use in a residential zone. So it has been used in the past as a commercial use.
Well, and I think these articles are tied to the whole project, obviously, and I think that it's the first one was to expand the area so that the whole project fits on it. If the project doesn't go forward, we shouldn't expand the area, I don't think, because there's not a compelling reason for that. We were looking at this as changing the numbers in general, and I was like, well, let's keep it focused on this project. And, yeah, clearly if the overall, whatever ultimately comes up is not approved, then yeah, we should withdraw this because it only makes sense in the context of the project.
Maybe a good segue to your second.
Could I just say, I'm listening to the questions that I hear. I think it's time for the FinCom to get up to speed with the project, and the best way to do that is we have a tremendous amount of material on the website. The last meeting that we had, I know it was a long one, but it was that part of the meeting was maybe 3 hours. But I'm hearing the same questions and everything that's already been discussed at the planning board meeting. So I think
that,
it's going
but with all due
that.
respect, you're here to present to us and to educate us, and this is the forum for
Right,
doing that.
yeah. But I'm just saying, we could talk about it for the 3 hours that we did at the last meeting. And it was, well, I'm saying there was a 1 hour before and then another part there, but it was maybe 3.5 hours. So, you know, I'd be happy to go over it, but looking at the project the way it is now, you're not going to see many more changes. I think it's any changes to be made will be relatively minor things that you may not even notice. So I think this is the time is now that you can really look at the project and say, okay, you can understand it and see what it is and how it works. And so the best way is the material on the site. That's everyone has to look at it if they really want to understand it. We have plenty of pictures and drawings and
Got it.
and maps. So don't feel that you still sit here waiting to see what this project is going to be. The way you see it here is the way it's pretty much going to be.
All right, Abby, why don't we move to the second article, please?
Wait, can I clarify something? Did I hear a difference, though? Did Abby say we should approve this, and Dave's saying we shouldn't if the whole thing doesn't go through? There is some conflict on whether there's value in changing the zoning for School Street, number 9 School Street?
Well, the planning board recommended bringing this article forward right now, but the hearing is still open, so at the conclusion of tonight, the planning board would continue your hearing to your next meeting on the 13th, and they usually keep their zoning hearings open during the course of your public hearings. Then they report back at town meeting with their ultimate recommendation. So at that time, they would, you could revisit your recommendation and make an updated recommendation on the zoning for town meeting.
Okay.
I just like to think positively and that this is a good project, and as I stated at the last meeting, that 4-1, the planning board is saying this project looks good, so it's going to be going through. So this zoning change is necessary for this project.
Right. Okay.
So it's almost.
And that would be the first thing to be approved anyway. So
well, we don't know what order.
Okay.
We don't know what order the selectmen will put it on. It doesn't matter because if one fails, then basically they're all going to fail. So the property will still be there, and I think these zoning changes make sense given that the developer has expanded the amount of property he owns, and that would, if this failed, I don't know what would happen to it, but the FMMUD, now that he owns that property, and it may make still sense, but I'd rather just look at it saying, okay, let's go ahead with this project, and this is what we need to do for this project.
May I just follow up on that? Both Mr. Atkins and Mr. Olenoff specified that this zoning is specific for this project. So 2 questions. Why doesn't that make this spot zoning? And 2, if you have this somewhat similar project in the future and that developer doesn't get as favorable treatment, are we not opening ourselves up to legal action?
It's not spot zoning because it's proposed next to the lots that are proposed to become, or to be rezoned, is expanding the boundary to those lots.
You're making it specific to this project in that zone. That makes it spot zoning.
I mean, we don't think so because it's next to these lots, and at times when the planning board has looked at other properties, if the lot, if the zoning line is split down the middle, they'll often recommend the full lot be rezoned so that we don't have the zoning line going down the middle of lots.
So the term spot zoning is not an official term that any planner uses. Some people tend to say, okay, you're rezoning a little piece here, a little piece there for certain points. This is all contiguous. It's just expanding the boundaries of an existing zone, which is the FMUOD, which formerly, included a whole lot of lots. So I wouldn't call it.
About expanding the FMOD, but making this specific lot suitable for a 15,000 square foot retail unit.
But legally,
You're not
I don't know,
making
you
it-
wouldn't run into any trouble. I mean, and either
But
we.
then my second question is, if another developer wants similar favorable treatment, and we deny him that same favorable treatment, are we opening up for legal action? He comes in
No.
and he wants another 15,000 square foot retail at the other end of Washington Street.
Well, then that would require modifying the zoning through town meeting, and I think that's kind of why it's kind of goes around and around, but it's like, as you're talking earlier about, could we just change the rules? It's like, well, yes, through town meeting. Now, if we were in our discretion saying that we think one developer can do 15,000, another can only do 10, that would be a big problem. But
I think this change we have actually, for the 15,000 is for the whole district. It's not just for this lot, right? So it's changing. Correct me if I'm wrong. We're saying by making this amendment, we're going to allow a 15,000 square foot retail throughout the entire FMUOD, not just on that corner.
Just in Washington Street.
Sorry, just in Washington Street. I apologize, but.
Right, so I thought you were
specific
talking
to that
about the
unit.
map. Right, so
Yeah.
the map, we talked about the specific property, and just going back a little bit, we have, since the, once the RFP came back to the town, the Islington Task Force reviewed it, and the Board of Selectmen reviewed it in 2016, and in 2017, we knew that the property owner that responded to the RFP did have this parcel that was zoned residential. So we have known for quite a bit of time that it would need a zoning change also on that size. So with other applications, we let them know up front what the zoning is, and then what would need to come forward for a zoning change. So the next article, that was about this is where we get into the size of the CVS. The CVS that's proposed for the Islington project is over the current limit of 10,000 square foot maximum. So the planning board is recommending adding language just in the FMUD 6, the Washington Street Business District, to allow the planning board to consider special permits for retail sales and services establishments between 10,000 and 15,000 square feet. That CVS is proposed at, it's a little over 13,000 for the retail sales area, and there's 1,700 for storage. But the way the zoning's written, if it's all on one floor, it's all combined into a total square footage. So the CVS is proposing all their storage on the first floor. The way they're currently set up, they're on the other side of the street, they have 7,000 square feet on the first floor, and then their storage is a little over 3,000, but in the basement. So when it's in the basement or attic space, it can be taken out of that retail sales figure. So they are proposing a bigger CVS at this location. And then in response to some questions that we had at earlier this evening and at your last meeting, I think in January, the Walgreens. We did
is that
have,
a slide, or
no,
is that
I
just
just
on
I
notes?
just
Okay.
had the Walgreens here on High Street. That is a little over 4,000 square feet, and then 1,500 feet of storage in the basement. And then the CVS on Route 1 in Dedham, that is 12,000 square feet, and then they have 1,200 square feet of unfinished storage. So that's a little over 13,000. So that one on Route 1 is similar to what you would see with this proposal.
So, I'm sorry, it would be how many square feet on the first floor?
12,000.
Proposed.
Oh, sorry, no, proposed here is
13,000.
14,786 total.
On
So
the
they want their
first floor.
storage, yeah, they want their storage. They propose their storage and the retail sales floor and the pharmacy on one floor.
Why does it have to be that way? Why can't it be 10,000 for the first floor?
Our understanding is that CVS doesn't go smaller anymore than this range, I guess. And I just want to note for some of the folks behind me too, that the developer's gone through great pains to talk them into this position, basically. CVS actually had very little, initially had no interest. The one up the street, the existing one, is very profitable. They have no need to move, but he's worked his way through to get them to this point. So the size has been, I believe, negotiated to a certain point to be more conducive to the project. They've talked them out of doing a drive-through window, which is something they don't do either, like ever. They always have a drive-through window now. And thirdly, they've coerced, or they've persuaded CVS to deviate entirely from their standard look, which is more like the building you see in Dedham on Providence Highway, which I think we can all agree we wouldn't want to see that in Islington Center. But they've managed to negotiate the deal with CVS to do this more village look for their building, which is something, again, they do on very, very rare occasions. So that's a little more color, I think, to the whole discussion. But I think the crux of this amendment is that it's the footprint you see is more in the range of what would need to have a larger cap than what is currently in the district to support it, basically.
It sounds like a lot of work's gone into trying to keep the CVS there. What's the rationale behind that? Is it heavily used, or do people in that neighborhood want a CVS there? Or it sounds like it's a lot of work done to.
He has a lease, right?
So our understanding from the developer is that in order for his overall financial model to work with all the various leases he's trying to play, CVS is kind of a critical piece of that. So a little of it has to do with purely how his performer works, I think. Did you have something else to add?
Right, yeah, I mean.
I think they said that CVS likes this location and they like the business that they have there. Even you might think, oh, they got the bigger place up the street, why don't they just go with that one? But they seem to do a certain kind of business in the Islington location that they want to continue.
Barb?
So if you're proposing this for throughout the FMUOD, the 15,000, is that applying to what's going to happen over at Islington Community Center? Is this like 15,000 per store or per building?
It is per business, that's how it's interpreted. So you can have, across the street, they're proposing, I think a total of the new building is 13,000 square feet, but it's more than one business as it's shown right now. That'd probably be two.
So although we're allowing that, is there any other place that it could, something like that could fit in along there where we would be concerned that we wouldn't have control over?
We'd always have control because this is a special permit. Okay. So just because we can allow this and that will allow this project to go forward doesn't mean the planning board will ever say yes to anyone else that comes along with something that big, and obviously we wouldn't.
Other questions from FinCom, Jim?
In addition to the zoning changes that we're looking at, has the developer requested any waivers that we wouldn't be privy to?
Well, wait, I mean, yeah, so wait, this is a special permit process. So there are a lot of things that are built into it that we can do and go to certain limits, and whether you call that a waiver or just we're exercising an extreme of the limits or not, I don't even know if you'd call them waivers, but I don't think there's anything specific on waivers.
Setback requirements or height requirements, or
just one height of several feet.
There's two waivers that I think are needed with the initial plans. Is the height of the proposed mixed-use building. Right now, the ICC building is over our maximum 35-foot height, and so they are proposing a more consistent with what's there today. I think 41 was shown on the height. That was our most recent plans. And then the landscape buffer. That's something that the planning board will be reviewing, and one of the requested items to have a more updated landscape plan for the buffer along the residential properties. So that would be on the East Street side and the School Street side.
So I'm,
They're requesting to go up to 41 feet?
no, the building,
Or the current building?
they're actually going to be lower than the current building, but it would still be higher than what we normally allow.
Trying to get it
So in that sense, yes, it's a waiver, but the building's actually getting lower. And the same thing with the buffer. The buffer is getting bigger than what we have now, but it still, in a sense, is a waiver because it's not the buffer you'd normally expect.
Julie and then George?
Does this CVS have the clinic in it? Kind of the physician appointment facilities that some of them have? Is it allowed with the zoning and stuff? It could.
It could, I don't know if we know that much detail yet, but generally when they have that, it's still considered a retail. The pharmacy and at that level is still considered retail for the zoning.
But it's different, it's not a medical use, right? Like this
Right.
was, I was curious about whether our recent zoning.
Right, we did recently at the last town meeting more clearly define medical uses in clinics. I don't think that would trigger that bump up into
So
the
what if
use.
CVS eventually wants to get into more of that? Then that would go through special permit? I mean, they're looking to merge with Aetna. They could be doing very different things than retail pharmacy even a couple of years from now. So what does that mean for us with this 15,000 square foot building?
It wouldn't be a variance.
It would be a change of use. But I can't remember, and I don't have the printed out bylaw from last November, but I don't think we allowed it in the local business zone for a
Yeah.
clinic. I think that was.
Yeah, if it's decided it doesn't come under that use, then they can't do it. And again, the zoning bylaws would have to be amended to include that use. And they couldn't go to the ZBA either because there would be a use waiver, which they can't be granted.
George?
Just a question for either Abby or Nora. If this project doesn't go forward, what options does the developer have with the property they've accumulated?
I mean, those areas, he could develop them under the existing zoning, which is mostly in the flexible multiple use. It would just be, or the underlying local business zoning, it would be without the town parcels included. So it would be on a more piecemeal basis that the planning board would review applications as they came in, and they would have to react to those applications. But they wouldn't be looking at the same layout where it'd be configuration and more comprehensive look on both sides of the street and multiple parcels.
Right. Well, basically, there would be no living units there, so the 18 condos wouldn't be there. And it would be,
That's not true.
Or not where they're shown on.
oh, you're saying if this project were turned down and it was not replaced by another FMUOD project, they would have to do parcel by parcel. And that would include any of the living units. And then, of course, the parcels would be different because you wouldn't have the land swap with the town. And again, it'd be lot by lot, and it would be reviewed by the planning board through an environmental review, lot by lot, where we don't have the discretion that we have through the special permit process. So everything would be quite different.
Could I just ask that? Sure. So if this project doesn't go through as a joint project, then I think the developer will be looking at their land and what they can do with theirs, either under the underlying zoning or under an FMUOD special permit. I think the town will continue to look at our land and see what we could do. Clearly, with us all owning that much jointly, putting it together is probably the best project we can get. If we develop it separately, we'll have different projects, that probably won't have the same benefits as the joint project. More importantly, we won't go as far to solving our 40B issue as we can with this project. So we will be looking at affordable housing down the line and our need before 2020 to do all we can to stay above 10%. If we get to that point, then the town may be looking for a friendly 40B project. Where that would be in town, I don't know, but we would be looking at town-owned land, at private-owned land. We have to do what we can with the land we have to keep Westwood moving forward. We need to keep our commercial tax base up. We need to keep our affordable housing numbers up, and we need to maintain our property appropriately. So what we have there are town-owned properties that are in sad shape, that need significant investment or replacement. That's why we're working on this project. That's why we're working together with the developer to try and put the pieces together and come up with something that's better than individual pieces, that the whole together is more profitable for the town, for the developer, for the neighborhood, and residents as a whole. So if that doesn't work out, if we can't get to the point where we have a project that is the best for all, then we'll go our separate ways, and they'll develop their land, we'll develop our land, or we'll look at some joint opportunities further down the line and we'll revisit it. But we're trying to concentrate on working towards what we think will be the best development for the town, for the neighborhood, for the developer, and for the residents.
And most importantly, the ICC, the problem with that will remain, and we'll be spending millions and millions of dollars to bring that up to code with no new functionality, the same inadequate functionality that it has now.
Tom?
My question gets back to CVS, but it's applicable to other businesses that might be possible tenants in Islington. And it gets to the look and the feel, and how much influence can the planning board and the town have on the design of storefronts and all? And because I ask that because I'm pretty certain that CVS has stores maybe down the Cape or in certain areas that demand that it looks a certain way. There's no CVS's on Nantucket, but they tried to get one downtown, and if they were able to, there's obviously a historic district commission that you have to follow all the rules and all. So in terms of look and feel, I think that's a big concern of many. And so not just look, but also scale. So how much influence do we have as a town on CVS?
So you have much more influence with a special permit process, because they know that we can turn them down. So when we say we want something, they're likely to respond. When they just go through the EIDR process, the environmental impact and design review process, there's no meat behind that. We have to convince them that this is what we like to see, and we can't really enforce it. We can just push it as much as we can, and we have in the past and been very good at that. But you don't have that absolute power to do that.
No, but if you told them that you really need to make a 12,000 square foot store work, and it's got to look like like other buildings in the village now, so that things sort of fit in, you'd probably have their attention?
Yeah, it's how good we are at doing that, yes.
Well, I would on this particular point, and this is lessons learned from his previous development across the street. The developer already got them down that path quite far before we even had to really intervene. As I mentioned before, you know, he'd already negotiated with them to say, you know what, we're not doing your typical, frankly, ugly CVS like you have out on Providence Highway. This is going to be a unique project that's going to have a look and feel of the rest of the development, which it does. I think we saw the image before, which is a fairly artistic rendering, but we have seen more architectural drawings that do render it as more of a colonial Cape style. That one's been around. That image has been around for a while, but yeah, it's far and away from what you see, what they would prefer to do. I guess to put it differently.
I think it's like how many. What's our cycle look like? Here we have March 13th hearing. Probably we might continue to the 20th. We have a number of sort of cracks at this in terms of like in the other projects we've done. We looked at the condos for University Station, and we had some feedback about the appearance, and they come back and they've redesigned the exterior appearance. So it feels like right now we were like, where do the pieces go on the map? And that's kind of what we did at the last meeting. And there was a lot of feedback on other issues, which we're hoping to get to bring up at the March 13th hearing. And then these are the things we have. How many more? I'm kind of asking. Abby here too, like, do we have enough time to iterate through these things so we can say, just trying to, what can you do with CVS?
You at least have the planning board has scheduled at least they have 2 meetings scheduled for March and 2 meetings scheduled in February. I mean, the next hearing is next week on the 13th, and then at that point, they'll decide when what they're gonna, next move is then. I know the applicant is diligently working on some of these design changes to get some updated plans for the planning board for the hearing next week.
Other questions from FinCom?
Can I trouble you again?
Yep.
Nora, you had mentioned that this developer, by going through with the developer, he's going to get ahead on the 40B housing. Is he proposing more than the 10%?
Well, he is required to put 15% of all the housing units he develops. So he did that in his first project. The units at 321 Washington Street, he created 12 new housing units, and he was required to make 2 of those units affordable. Now he's proposing 18 new condominiums, and he needs to come up with 15% of that, which is 3 new affordable units. The proposal that's on the table takes one of those new units and puts it in a 321 Washington Street building. That allows 3 units of the 12 in that building to be affordable, which gets us to the 25% threshold, which allows the state to count all 12 units in that building on the town's SHI. That makes a big jump for the town in trying to stay above the 10%. And then the other 2 units he needs to develop. Right now he's proposing putting those in the building that used to house the ski stop and has apartments upstairs. He's proposing converting those 2 apartments to affordable units, and the planning board indicated that they would support that proposal. So the project would still create only 3 new affordable units, but we would actually be counting 12 new affordable units that we don't count today by this project. So that helps us take a big jump forward.
What people don't understand is that in 2020, there's a major change that occurs every decade. The census gets taken, national census gets taken, and at that time, DHCD makes one-time adjustment to the number of units in every community. We lost Westwood Glen this last decade, 156 units of affordable housing. We were at 13-point-something%, but the loss of 156 units at Westwood Glen brought us back down to just over 10%. When you make the adjustment for the development that's occurred in the last decade, they weren't all offset by the creation of 10% affordable housing. There is a shortage. We're still working on a calculation of shortage. So these 12 units that we pick up would go a long way in closing that gap. It'll leave us a few houses away rather than many houses away, or units away from getting the 10%. And that's very important, because if you fall by one unit below 10%, ask Canton what happens. An unfriendly 40B can be proposed, and you can't stop it. The state will step in and rule in favor of the developer. Whereas if you're above 10%, which is why we've been doing this, we are able to determine what we want in the way of affordable housing projects, and we can turn them away if they're not compatible with what we're looking for. So this is a very, very important issue.
Other questions from FinCom? Questions or comments from residents? Start this way. Yes, ma'am. If you could use the mic, please. Thank you.
So just regarding the size of the CVS, there is a CVS currently being built in Provincetown, and it's 9,000 square feet. It will open sometime. It's starting in 2018. CVS does, if you ask, work with you on your types of signing that you can say you have to have a certain color, require certain building heights and everything. So you can totally work with CVS. It's not a given that you have to have a 13,000. You can go over in the entire United States. They're all over the place. There's 8,000, there's 4,000. They're all different numbers. So we don't even need to do this article to up it to 15 or up to 15, because currently they could have an addition by 3,000 square feet by just going to 10. And just a clarification on the waivers, there was a parking waiver also given by the planning board. They needed 44 spots and they only had 185, so they gave them a waiver for 59.
Well, there've been no waivers granted yet, so we did look at the study which showed a net deficit. So that's definitely one of the things we will have to vote on.
Technically, it's called a determination, which means that we determine that the parking is adequate. So there's been a lot of parking added to this. So we have much more parking overall on this project than we have now. But there's also been more uses that have been created. But the numbers come up in the end pretty much. We're off by about the same amount in the future that we will be now. So we aren't creating any new problems. We aren't solving any problems. And, you know, parking's always, some people there'll never be enough parking. But we feel that our parking will be adequate and no more problems than there are today.
In his presentation, he said there was 244 spots that were required by our bylaw, and he had 185. So what is that? Okay.
Development under the FMUOD bylaw requires no set minimum parking at all. It requires the planning board to make a determination looking at the uses, looking at the specific buildings, the locations next to each other, and how the uses will offset each other, and the planning board determines the parking need. Much like at University Station, there was not a calculation for how many parking spaces they needed for each individual store or restaurant. There was a calculation for the project as a whole that the planning board determined was sufficient, and that's what they'll do here. So I think the discussion that Jennifer's referring to, they looked at the underlying zoning. If they were looking at the bylaw requirement for a restaurant with X number of seats and for a commercial structure that was a certain square footage, and for, I don't know, the residential uses where the bylaw requires one space, but they're actually requiring 2 spaces for their own purposes. They looked at those numbers and added them up and came up with lists and said where they fell in relation to those requirements, but those are not requirements for the section of the zoning bylaw that they're developing under. So there is no waiver needed for parking, but the planning board does have to satisfy themselves that there is sufficient parking to meet the needs of all the new uses that are proposed.
Thank you, Nora. Were there other hands? Yeah, go ahead.
I guess I keep focusing on the CVS and the size. I mean, I think it really takes away from the village feel. And after hearing the comments of this woman, you know, I just really hope that you would support us in not allowing such a large. I've heard that the CVS that is currently there does more business than the one on Odette. So obviously, they're not going to change their location because it's a gold mine. So I feel that probably financially, not only are we giving away wonderful space, I mean, the builders are gaining a lot and will gain a lot in terms of improvement, but the property is very valuable, and I think we should pull the cards in terms of how it's developed to our liking. And so I would really hope that all of you would really consider that it's your neighborhood that it's moving into. You've all seen what CVS does, and we don't need one that big. I think it'll take away from Roach Brothers products and the quaintness. And in terms of your comment, Julianne, in terms of CVS, they are moving in terms of healthcare facilities. Yeah. And, you know, there's a PT and a dentist. Those are medical. Are they specially, was there a special permit for them to move in there? I wonder. It doesn't seem like anybody really had the answer to that in terms of what would be involved in them changing what they were doing. I'm not adverse to that, but I'm just saying, you know, what is moving in.
Thank you. I think Kate behind you.
Hi, Kate Wynn, again, 10 Cedar Hill Drive. I do appreciate the conflicting priorities, what everybody's trying to balance out as they look at this, but the one thing I just wanted to really mention again is that should this project work and we attract wonderful new businesses and wonderful new residents onto Washington Street, that's going to be 60 to 70 more cars coming on and off at the beginning and end of every day, adding to the current, and I hear you say it won't make things worse, but if we don't change the traffic patterns at all, of course it will make things worse. So I just want to underscore that, because it will be hard to attract more businesses and fully execute that plan if people don't want to come down the street, because it's hard. So.
Adam Elizavlevich Fabrizio, 32 Webster Street. I'll be quick because I know it's getting late. The planning board meeting last week, I was there for more than 4 hours. Tonight, it's more than 3 hours. And my observation of all these hearings is that from having Mike talk and Abby and our planning board members and John Hickey, everybody is waiting on someone else. That's what I see from all of this. And I think that even the suggestion of the members of this Finance Commission to sit and watch all these hearings is ridiculous. Because I understand that your function is to vet, review, and make a recommendation. And you should have something in writing, and I fully support that. Again, everyone is waiting on someone else. And I also want to talk just briefly about the affordable units. The developer did want a waiver. He's potentially building 18 condominiums, 18 two-bedroom condominiums, but it's not economically feasible for him to provide the 3 affordable condominiums as per our current bylaws. So the agreement, from what I see, is apartments. The developer is going to give apartments under the affordability zoning bylaw. Granted, it's in the same section of town, but it's not a fair trade. People, if I fell within the guidelines and I had the opportunity to buy a 2-bedroom apartment being built, I mean a 2-bedroom condominium being built, why should I be marginalized? It's like, no, we can't let you bid or whatever on a brand new condominium. We're going to stick you in an apartment. It's not right. Those are zoning bylaws with respect to units, whether they're apartments or condominiums. We say how many need to be affordable, and we're going to say, okay, you don't have to provide the 3 affordable condominiums. We'll just put apartments somewhere else or grab apartments somewhere else. I think it's ridiculous. And I just wanted to make that clear. There was a waiver, and that's the process of all this. And I just think that what I had mentioned earlier, my comments about the rushing and the pushing the development through, I think this just confirms that this is being rushed and pushed, and everybody, you need to make a decision like right now when people are waiting on people. It's not right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, yeah,
We have a reply.
Okay, the hour is getting late, so
Well, no, you've raised some of the same concerns I did when we were first looking at this. And it does not.
It's not a sign. It is a sign.
Okay. All right.
Not so subtle.
So I think it is on its face. It isn't an equal trade to go from 3 2-bedroom condos to 3 apartments. But and I looked into what the realities of the rental markets are around here and the affordable housing and everything. I talked to our housing agent and looked at this, and I came to the conclusion that the benefit is that we are getting condos. These are new. It's affordable, not technically affordable, but as an alternative to a bunch of apartments, the condos provide another type of affordability for people to buy into Westwood. And that the rental units, in fact, are what most people who are looking for affordable units today, the demand is all for rentals. Ideally, I would have liked to have seen the 2-bedroom condos be rentals. Like if that was the issue, that would have been, I think it would have been great to have some 2-bedroom rentals in town. But on balance, when I looked at kind of the overall needs of this, I mean, I know I'm on the Housing Authority also and WAHA, and I think that they came down more just to force the issue to say you need to have 3 condos. But on balance, I think that this does serve affordability needs better, and it has the bonus of benefiting the town's subsidized housing index. I think there's a lot of things at play there, and I do really believe that having some condos in Islington Center is a more affordable thing than having McMansions built all over town or something. So I think that it's a complicated set of issues here, and I think that in this case it balances out to something that is a net benefit in terms of affordability.
Thank you. You do have one more article, the housekeeping article.
Oh, right, this was just a standard housekeeping general article that we put on in case we discover any errors while we're reviewing the zoning. We haven't found any, so if we don't have any by the time your continued hearing on March 26th, we can withdraw that article.
Anything else from FinCom to the planning board? Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody who came tonight and who shared your views with us. It was very helpful. Thank you very much. So folks, in terms of our schedule, so this will conclude, I should say for the record, the public hearing. Seeing as we've gotten through the entire agenda, we will not be meeting tomorrow night. Our next scheduled meeting is March 13th. That's subcommittee report night. So, just one more minute. I just want to raise, as you folks know, our next set of public hearings starts on March 26th with the option to go to the 27th if necessary. We had this discussion vis-a-vis the Islington article, which is not finalized. I don't know what the possibilities are or the appetite may be for meeting in advance of our public hearing. I also don't know when we may have something in writing to discuss. So
you have to advertise the meeting. How much advance?
48 hours.
48 hours.
Not including weekends.
Oh, that's what it is.
So I just wanted to close the.
Can I make, sometimes I feel like in the past we've gotten almost a quick verbal update. If we're still going here next Tuesday and the planning board has language, it has feedback.
I don't think
They
they
have a
will
meeting
on the.
that day.
Yeah, they're meeting that night.
But sometimes that night, don't we get an update?
If they're
Or
done,
they-
but I
if they're
think they're
done.
planning on not.
No,
I think you can plan on that, yeah.
5 hours?
I mean, I suppose we could, one option would be to take it as it comes to see when the language is in shape to give us, and then we could, well, we can't deliberate, so.
And we're gonna have
Mary Ann,
to,
one-
we're gonna
one-
have to do it, we're gonna have to do Islington Center on the 26th and everything else on the 27th.
Right.
Vote on the
That's,
27th.
yeah, vote on the 27th, we're gonna be able to do it. Islington Center is gonna be a
Gonna be-
5-hour meeting in and of itself.
That's right.
So it's the only way you can do it, or we're gonna vote indefinite postponement, and they're gonna have 30 days to think about it by themselves, because we're not gonna have a chance to give them a recommendation. I don't know how else we can do it, unless they get their act together and submit something sooner.
But I think, Mike, you brought up a bigger point, which is, how does the rest of the town absorb all of
No, that's not my point. I think the town has time from when we're done to when the town meeting is, and they can hear about it on the town floor, but we're done. We're done on the 26th or 27th.
We had also talked about starting earlier for those hearings, maybe starting at 6:30, given how late these meetings go. Are people in favor of doing that? I wouldn't do it unless there was sort of a majority around that, a consensus. How do people feel? I know people work and commute. Are people comfortable with doing a 6:30 time?
I can't do 6:30.
You can't do 6:30. Well, I don't want to lose anybody to the
Could we do
time.
7?
Can we do 7?
On the 26th, I'll be late at 7. But,
Okay,
I mean,
well, maybe we'll.
So you can do the Pledge of Allegiance real slow.
Yeah. All right, we'll try to do 7, just to alleviate the late night. George?
I understand people's concerns. Let me try and summarize a couple of things. I think the issues here are extremely important. This is a one-time opportunity for the town. I also would not underestimate this issue of 40B housing. If you want to get a sense of what happened to Needham, take a ride down Greendale Avenue. You can see this big project off of 128. And Needham ended up with a massive 40B project coming in. And you want to talk about an impact on schools. And these are multi-hundred unit projects. So I think you got to weigh the issues. If we decide not to do it, that's fine. I'm frankly not vested one way or the other, but the guidance I would give you, it's a one-time opportunity to take the assets the town has, combine it with the developer. What we have to determine is a town getting fair value. Is it a deal that makes sense for the town? That's what the selectmen negotiate.
But George, you're ahead of the
Yeah,
question.
yeah, we're
That's
just
not even,
pro-
what we're
No,
talking
what I'm
about.
saying to you is, I'm just saying, these are the things we need to talk through.
Right.
And you know, it may take 2 nights, but I think the consequences, I mean, Mike, out of courtesy to you, just talking about indefinite postponement, I think this is too serious of an option. This is a one-time. If we want to vote it down, fine. If we want to vote it to go forward, I think, in spite of the fact that time is pressured, we have to commit the time to do it.
Well, that's-
Let me finish. That makes 2 hearings, that's fine, because I think the consequences for the town either way are fairly significant. And this is not an easy call one way or the other. Remember, if we don't go forward, there are substantial costs for the library, there's substantial costs for the ICA building. We have to decide is that something we want to confront. Okay, and then there's just the issue of, I think it hasn't been stated enough, the town, look, I'm a big advocate of affordable housing, believe me, but I think the town needs to consider, you know, if we don't do this, what exposure have we created for the town? You got to weigh all these issues. So I think we've got to give it as much time as it takes on the 26th or the 27th. And the selectmen, I mean, they only can work so fast until the project is finalized, until the details are worked out. Remember, this went from apartments to condominiums, which was a huge concession on the developer's part. Right now, CVS is in property he owns. He's got a very profitable tenant there. But he has told us the linchpin for this project, if he can't move CVS across the street, he can't make the numbers work. I mean, he's given the town a lot of concessions. On the other hand, I think the town's got to make sure, are we getting a fair deal? Is this deal right for the town? But this, to me, is a one-time up or down vote, and either we do it or we don't. And it's got to have serious
Okay.
consideration.
You already have the 27th open.
We
What's the
have
problem?
committed both nights, George.
Okay.
That's what they're there for. I think, you know, Mike put it very well, that we're likely
We have to do it.
you know, spend.
If they're ready.
Right. The only question we were talking about before you made your statement is whether we would be able and whether it makes any sense to try to schedule an additional meeting between March 13th and March 26th. That is the issue. However, we do not know when we are going to get a written proposal, so it is difficult to try to schedule such a meeting. So I am open to ideas. George, what's your idea?
I would reserve the 2 nights. I don't think the selectmen are going to be able, I don't know. What I'm hearing here, this is not an easy negotiation. It's fairly complex. I don't think they're going to have it resolved. Frankly, they'll try to get us as much we ought to insist they get us as much information as they can, however we can distribute it, because we can't convene outside of this forum, to try and get the members up to date. But I think we and the selectmen have got to spend a good chunk of time together going through this. I don't think accelerating. Mary Ann, I wish it would, but I don't think it's going to get done before the 26th or the 27th.
And I think we should stick with our schedule as is.
I do too.
All right. Is there anything else? Oh, can we approve the minutes? Oh my gosh, I don't have them in front of me. Yes, we care.
I motion to accept the minutes of January 21st, 2018.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I have to abstain. I
Opposed?
was not, sad to say, I missed the meeting. So.
Okay.
I'm abstaining too.
All right.
Abstain.
Okay, motion to adjourn? So moved. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thanks, everybody.
That was in the February meeting.
So don't forget, I'm not on the 14th.
Oh. 21 minutes.
Sorry to keep you all.
Going to bed.